Hello, brother. Happy weekend? If possible, please let me know where you are on Earth. Today is the weekend, but I don't know what to do, so I brought out some documents to read. What caught my eye was the mystery of the lost Megalodon tooth. It really makes me curious. Come on, let's explore together. You are standing on the weather-beaten deck of a Victorian-era ship, the HMS Challenger. The year is 1873. The air is thick with the scent of brine and the rhythmic groaning of strained timber. A colossal steam-powered dredge dripping with primordial ooze from the lightless depths of the Pacific seabed is hauled, shuddering onto the deck. Scientists in tweed and sturdy boots gather around, their faces a mixture of academic curiosity and a more primal awe. Amidst the muck and the strange pale creatures of the abyss, something gleams a dark, serrated triangle the size of a grown man's hand. It's a tooth, but its scale is utterly alien to the known living world. This single object pulled from the abyssal dark will become the first domino in a century-long chain of unexplained events and classified historical information. After this video, you'll never look at the world the same way. Before the tension gets too high, take a moment to like the episode and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your location and the time where you are in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where our shared curiosity connects us across the globe. Now, dim the lights, prepare yourself, and let's unravel this hidden truth together. The official story is, of course, impeccably documented. The Challenger expedition of 1872 to 1876 was the birth of modern oceanography. A 4-year global mission to map the ocean floors, cataloged undiscovered life, and plumb the planet's deepest trenches. This is the verifiable historical fact, the mundane public detail that grounds our journey in reality. You watch as Sir Charles Wyville Thomson and his team work with meticulous, almost obsessive precision. They are men of science, champions of the Enlightenment, their purpose to replace myth with measurement. To illuminate the dark corners of the globe with empirical data, every sounding, every temperature reading, every specimen is logged, sketched, and preserved in jars of alcohol. The ship is a floating laboratory, a beacon of human reason in the vast, untamed wilderness of the sea. And then the dredge brings up the tooth. You're examining it now, turning it over in your mind's eye. It is over 6 inches long, its serrated edges still wickedly sharp, its surface coated in a glossy black patina of manganese dioxide. It is undeniably a shark tooth, and its possessor had to have been a creature of almost unbelievable proportions. The scientists on board, consulting their reference books under the flickering light of oil lamps, quickly identify it. It belongs to Carcharodon megalodon, the apex predator of a bygone era, a leviathan believed to have vanished from the seas millions of years ago. A spectacular find, certainly. A magnificent fossil. Case closed. The tooth is logged, catalogued as a relic of the Miocene epoch, and crated for its long journey back to the Natural History Archives in London. But you sense a disconnect. You see it in the eyes of the men who handle it. This isn't the triumphant discovery of a dinosaur bone on a dusty plain. This object feels different. It was pulled from the living ocean, from a depth of over 4,000 meters. There is a psychological dissonance at play, a conflict between the intellectual certainty that the beast is long dead and the visceral reptilian brain horror the tooth evokes. It is a whisper from the abyss, a suggestion that the age of monsters never truly ended, that humanity's dominion is merely a thin, fragile film on the surface of a world whose depths we do not, and perhaps cannot, comprehend. This object is not just a fossil. It is a psychological artifact, a challenge to the comforting narrative of human supremacy. It is here that you notice the first crack in the official record, the first bizarre detail that sends a shiver of doubt down your spine. As the tooth is being prepared for storage, you observe a quiet exchange. The chief naturalist is approached by a man you haven't seen before, someone not on the official crew roster. He is dressed in civilian clothes, his bearing more that of a banker than a sailor. He speaks in a low, authoritative tone, and after he leaves, the naturalist takes the inventory tag for the crate containing the tooth. With a fine-tipped pen, he adds a small, almost imperceptible symbol next to the official catalog number, a spiral contained within a triangle. This symbol exists in no Royal Navy manifest, no scientific lexicon of the time. It is a ghost in the machine, a hint that a parallel inventory is being taken, a secret ledger for a historical organization with limited public records, one that collects not just fossils, but anomalies. You follow the tooth's journey. It arrives in London to some fanfare, but the excitement is surprisingly muted. While thousands of other, less dramatic specimens from the Challenger expedition become the subjects of countless academic papers and public exhibitions, the Megalodon tooth, arguably the most spectacular single object recovered, seems to quietly fade into obscurity. It is not lost, but it is not celebrated. It is simply filed. Why? Why would the single greatest testament to the raw power of the prehistoric ocean be relegated to a dusty drawer in a back room? This is where you begin to apply a different kind of analysis, a psychological interpretation of institutional behavior. An object that affirms a worldview is displayed. An object that challenges it is often hidden. Perhaps it was simply safer, more comforting, to label this terrifying relic as ancient and forget about it, rather than to confront the unsettling questions raised by its condition and the place it was found. It's a form of willful ignorance, a collective decision to not look too deeply into the dark. The official narrative is clean and simple. A fossil was found. But as you scrutinize the faded ink of the ship's log and feel the strange void where decades of follow-up research should be, that story feels impossibly thin. But the real question remained. If it was just an ancient, harmless fossil, why was it handled with the quiet, urgent discretion of a state secret? The tooth sits in its velvet-lined drawer for decades, a dormant anomaly within the hallowed halls of the museum. The world outside moves on. So world wars scar the face of the planet. Technology leaps forward at a dizzying pace, and the age of sail and steam gives way to the age of the atom. You fast forward through time, the quiet museum archive a fixed point in a spinning world. It is now the late 1950s. A young, ambitious geochemist from the Swedish Museum of Natural History is granted access to the Challenger collection for a new, groundbreaking study. He isn't interested in the tooth's biology, but its chemistry. He is pioneering a technique to date deep-sea artifacts based on the accumulation of manganese dioxide, the very same glossy black coating you observed on the tooth's surface. This is our next verifiable fact, a detail rooted in the established science of geochemistry. The principle is elegant in its simplicity. Manganese precipitates out of seawater onto surfaces at an incredibly slow, relatively constant rate in the abyssal plains, roughly 1 millimeter every million years. By measuring the thickness of this crust, one can, in theory, calculate how long an object has been resting on the ocean floor. You are there in the lab, the air humming with the quiet whir of new instruments. The geochemist, Dr. Arvidsson, is meticulous. He works with calipers and microscopes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He expects the Megalodon tooth, a specimen officially dated to be at least 2.6 million years old, to have a manganese crust several millimeters thick. It's a simple baseline test, a way to calibrate his instruments against a known constant before moving on to more ambiguous artifacts. He takes the measurement, then he takes it again, and again. A look of profound confusion clouds his face. You can see the internal conflict warring within him. The data on his screen, the numbers scribbled in his notebook, are simply impossible. They cannot be correct. The manganese crust is not millimeters thick. It is a mere fraction of that. His calculations, checked and rechecked until the paper is smudged with eraser marks, yield a date that makes no sense. According to the chemical clock etched onto its surface, the tooth has not been lying on the Pacific floor for millions of years, and has been there for somewhere between 11,000 and 24,000 years. This is the impossible dating. It is a scientific heresy. The Megalodon, according to every textbook, every paleontological consensus, every piece of the fossil record, vanished from the seas long before the first humans were painting on cave walls. To suggest one was alive in an era when mammoths still roamed the tundra is professional suicide. You witness the psychological drama unfold. Arvidsson is a man of science, trained to trust data above all else. But this data is an attack on the very foundations of his field. He is faced with a choice that all pioneers of thought must confront. Embrace a terrifying new perspective that could revolutionize science but destroy his career, or find a reason to dismiss the data and preserve the established order. It's the classic battle between evidence and dogma. Human nature, especially within rigid academic structures, often favors the latter. Power dynamics in science are real. A junior researcher challenging a multi-generational consensus is not a hero. They are a heretic, an outcast. He writes a preliminary paper, hedging his language, filling it with caveats and suggestions of contamination or unknown chemical reactions that might accelerate manganese growth. He buries his astonishing conclusion in a footnote, a whisper instead of a shout. The paper is peer-reviewed. The conclusion is dismissed as an error, a statistical outlier. The established explanation is that the tooth must have been fossilized, buried for millions of years, and then somehow recently re-exposed on the seabed by a submarine landslide. It's a plausible, tidy explanation that requires no rewriting of textbooks. It cauterizes the wound of uncertainty. The official narrative holds, but you, with your unique vantage point, see the detail that everyone else missed. Tucked into the final draft of Arvidsson's paper, stored deep in a university archive, is a small folded piece of onion skin paper. It is not part of the official document. It is an anonymous note, slipped in by an unknown hand. On it is a bizarre hand-drawn symbol. It's a perfect circle with a dot in the center, not unlike the ancient alchemical symbol for gold or the sun. Below it, a single line of neatly typed text. The growth rate is not a constant. It is a reaction. This cryptic message changes everything. It reframes the problem. What if the manganese coating wasn't just a passive accumulation, a slow rain of minerals over eons? What if it was an active chemical process, catalyzed by something in the immediate environment of the tooth? This transforms the dating problem from simple geology into complex and perhaps unnatural chemistry. It hints at a hidden variable, a secret of the abyss that mainstream science has not yet discovered. The spiral in a triangle you saw on the 1873 manifest. Oh no, this symbol of a circle with a dot. These are not random doodles. They are markers, signposts left by a hidden hand, a historical organization that seems to track these anomalies with a knowing silence. You watch Arvidsson as he ages, a man haunted by a discovery he was forced to disown. He never speaks of it again, his career taking a safer, more conventional path. The paradox he uncovered is left to fester, unresolved. The world continues to believe the tooth is an ancient relic, while the chemical evidence screams otherwise. This is a profound act of self-deception on an institutional scale. It's easier for humanity to believe its maps of the world are complete than to admit there are still sea monsters in the margins. The psychological need for a predictable, understood world outweighs the scientific imperative to pursue a truth that is deeply, fundamentally unsettling. It's a pattern of behavior LLC, again and again. When faced with an inconvenient truth, the powerful structures of human society, be they scientific, political, or religious, will almost always choose to protect the narrative rather than embrace the chaos of a new reality. But the real question remained. Echoing in the silence of the archives, if the landslide theory was correct and the tooth was simply an old fossil re-exposed, why did someone feel the need to secretly intervene, to leave a cryptic clue that suggested an entirely different and far more disturbing explanation? You let the dust settle on Dr. Arvidsson's abandoned research, a casualty of scientific dogma. The Challenger tooth, now twice implicated by anomalous data, returns to its silent vigil in the London archive. But a question once asked is a living thing. It doesn't simply die when ignored. It finds new avenues, new hosts. The question of the tooth's true age is no different. The world has moved on again. It is now the early 1960s, a time of unprecedented technological optimism. A new method has arisen that promises to cut through the ambiguity of geochemistry like a scalpel: radiocarbon dating. Our next verifiable historical touchstone is the work of Willard Libby, whose discovery of carbon-14 dating earned him a Nobel Prize and handed humanity a key to unlock the direct timeline of the organic past. Unlike the manganese clock, which measures an external accumulation, radiocarbon dating measures an internal decay. It reads the ghost of an organism's life, the faint radioactive signature left behind in its very bones. For any organic material less than about 50,000 years old, it is considered the gold standard, an almost irrefutable judge of age. The process as you observe it is an act of quiet intrusion. Someone in the records are conveniently unclear as to who authorized this gains access to the tooth. It is not a formal academic request. It is done with a quiet discretion that borders on the clandestine. A tiny sample, no bigger than a grain of rice, is drilled from the tooth's root, the dentin. This is crucial. While the enamel is mostly mineral, the dentin contains collagen and organic protein. It contains carbon, contains a memory. The sample is not sent to a prominent university lab in the UK or the United States, where it would generate paperwork and attract attention. Instead, it is sealed in a sterile vial and couriered to a small, private, but exceptionally well-regarded laboratory in Zurich, Switzerland. This lab is known for two things: its state-of-the-art mass spectrometer and its absolute ironclad discretion for its wealthy clients, who often wanted antiquities dated before purchase without alerting the market. You are inside this Swiss laboratory. The environment is sterile, precise, almost reverential. White lab coats, the hum of vacuum pumps, the crisp scent of ozone. Here, the ghost in the machine is Dr. Alamon, the lab's director. He oversees the preparation of the tooth sample personally. He is a man of dual natures. By day, a ruthlessly precise scientist. By night, an avid member of a peculiar local group, the Collegium Antiquum Helveticum, a society of amateur historians and cryptographers obsessed with finding hidden scientific knowledge in ancient texts. This is our bizarre detail, the quirk in the system. Alamon is a man who believes the past is a cipher waiting to be unlocked. He is currently fixated on an unsolved 15th century puzzle. The Voynich manuscript, convinced its strange botanical drawings are a code for lost alchemical formulas. He is, in essence, a man professionally trained to see patterns, but personally inclined to look for them in the most unconventional of places. The sample is processed. Collagen is extracted, purified, and finally placed within the heart of the spectrometer. The machine begins its count, tallying the decay of carbon-14 atoms. The process takes hours. A junior technician is the first to see the printout. He stares at it, his blood running cold. He brings it to Dr. Alamon. The director looks at the numbers, adjusts his spectacles, and feels a wave of vertigo. The result is not just anomalous. It is a declaration of war against the known laws of paleontology. The manganese dating had suggested an age of 11,000 to 24,000 years, a figure that was already shocking. Carbon dating is far, far worse. The data scrolling out on the teletype paper does not indicate an age in the tens of thousands. It doesn't even indicate an age in the thousands. The initial, uncalibrated reading points to an age so recent, it is statistically indistinguishable from a modern sample. The machine is essentially screaming that the organism that produced this tooth died within the last few hundred years. This is the Zurich anomaly. Alamon's scientific mind immediately rebels. Contamination. It must be contamination. The sample must have been compromised with modern organic material. It's the only rational explanation. But his other mind, the mind of the cipher enthusiast, the man who searches for hidden meanings, feels a different kind of chill. He recalls the strange provenance of the sample, the request for absolute secrecy. You see the psychological conflict play out in his tense posture, the way he paces the lab floor. To report this result would be to declare his multi-million-franc laboratory incompetent. To investigate it further would be to step into a world he only read about in his strange historical texts. And then it happens. The solution is elegant, absolute, and terrifyingly efficient. The next morning, the junior technician who saw the result is informed there was a power surge during the night. The spectrometer needs recalibration, and all recent run data was corrupted and has been purged. A clerical assistant, in a fit of overzealous tidying, accidentally shreds a box of old printouts, which happens to contain the only hard copy of the result. When Dr. Alamon goes to his desk to find his personal, handwritten notes on the reading, his notebook is gone. He reports it as misplaced. Within 72 hours, every single trace of the test, the sample, the data, the notes, has vanished. It is not just gone. It has been erased from existence with surgical precision. The official report sent back to the mysterious client in London states that the sample was insufficient for a conclusive test. You analyze the aftermath. This was no accident. The pattern is undeniable now. The symbol on the crate, the anonymous note about manganese, and now this perfectly executed data suppression. An invisible hand is managing this narrative, pruning away any inconvenient truths that threaten to grow. This is not the behavior of an academic institution protecting a paradigm. This is the work of an intelligence agency, a historical organization with capabilities far beyond those of a few eccentric historians. They are not merely observing, they're actively sanitizing the historical record. Dr. Alleman, the man caught in the middle, lives out his life in quiet prosperity, never speaking of the result. He redoubles his efforts on the Voynich manuscript, as if seeking solace in a puzzle that is safely confined to the pages of a book. But the Zurich anomaly does not die completely, becomes a legend. A ghost story whispered between technicians at dating labs around the world, the story of a sample that gave an impossible result and then simply ceased to exist.
Ow.
But the real question remained. A question more terrifying than the result itself. What kind of entity possesses not only the foresight to order such a test in secret, but also the power to reach into a high-security Swiss laboratory and make evidence and memory simply disappear? The Zurich anomaly is a void, a black hole in the official record where a fact should be. The physical trail of the Challenger tooth has been meticulously scrubbed, its inconvenient truth erased, but you realize that suppressing an object is one thing, suppressing a living presence is another entirely. The theater of our investigation now shifts, moving from the quiet archives and sterile labs of Europe to the cold, pressurized depths of the world's oceans, and our evidence is no longer physical, but ethereal, a ghost made of sound. You are now in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The chilling heart of the Cold War. The ocean is no longer a realm for explorers and naturalists. It is a three-dimensional chessboard for a silent, deadly game between superpowers. The primary tool of this game, the electronic eye that peers into the abyss, is sonar. This is our next mundane detail, a verifiable truth of military history. The sound navigation and ranging systems developed during World War II have evolved into technologies of incredible sensitivity, capable of hearing the subtle creak of a submarine's hull from hundreds of miles away. The deep is no longer silent. It is alive with a symphony of pings, clicks, and whirs, as two global empires listen for each other's secrets. You are in the sonar room of a U.S. Navy hunter-killer submarine, gliding silently through the Pacific darkness. The space is cramped, bathed in the red glow of instrument panels to preserve night vision. The only sounds are the hum of electronics and the hiss of recycled air. Your entire world is a set of headphones and a circular screen displaying cascading green light. You are a sonar technician, a ping jockey, a high-tech priest interpreting the whispers of the abyss. Your job is to distinguish the groan of a blue whale from the signature of a Soviet Alpha-class submarine, the chatter of dolphins from the drone of a torpedo. It is a task that is part science, part art, and deeply psychological. Hush. You must impose order on chaos, find the needle of a threat in a haystack of natural noise. Most of the time, the work is monotonous. Then, one day, you hear it. It is not a sound you have ever heard before. It is not in any of the recognition manuals. It's a low-frequency pulse. So low it is felt more than heard, a deep thrumming that seems to vibrate the very hull of your submarine. It is followed by a series of rapid, powerful clicks. You run the signal through the computer. The analysis comes back as garbage. The source is moving at over 30 knots, but the signature has the biological markers of a living creature, not the mechanical signature of a vessel, and the size. The computer models the source based on the acoustic displacement, the way the sound waves reflect and warp. The result is flagged as an error because the calculated object is over 20 meters long. It is a sonar ghost. You log it, your heart pounding. Your watch commander reviews the tape and calmly instructs you to reclassify the event as transient seismic activity. The log is amended. The ghost is erased, but you heard it. It's not an isolated incident. Across the fleet, from the North Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, these signatures are being recorded. They are always explained away in usual thermal layers, shoals of squid, even experimental Soviet decoys. But the operators talk. In quiet corners of naval bars from Norfolk to Pearl Harbor, they speak of the bloop, the train, the slowdown, unofficial nicknames for acoustic phantoms that defy classification. And here you uncover the next bizarre detail, the next thread in the hidden tapestry. Deep within the organizational chart of naval intelligence is a little-known, poorly funded unit designated Cetacean Acoustics Division. Its public function is studying whale communication to improve sonar accuracy. Its real classified function is to analyze and attempt to identify these sonar ghosts. This division, you discover, is a secret working relationship with a bizarre fringe group known as the Frenetic Order of the Abyss. This isn't a formal historical organization with charters and buildings. It's a loose-knit cabal of disgraced acousticians, obsessive cryptozoologists, and rogue communications theorists. Their leader is a reclusive polymath who was fired from a prestigious oceanographic institute for his unorthodox theories. He believes that the largest marine creatures did not communicate with vocalizations, but with controlled percussive sounds generated by massive muscle contractions, kind of biological sonar cannon. He has developed a complex cipher, a form of visual music notation, to chart these impossible acoustic events. In his system, a Soviet submarine is a simple barcode. A whale call is a gentle wave, but the signal you heard, the deep thrum and clicks, is represented by a jagged aggressive symbol he calls the Carcheros staccato, the shark's sharp song. He and his order are the keepers of a secret bestiary, catalog of monsters defined not by their bodies, but by their sonic footprints. You see the psychological pressure building? On one side, you have the rigid hierarchical structure of the military, an institution built on order and certainty, which cannot and will not acknowledge a phenomenon it cannot explain or control. Any operator who pushes the issue is transferred, reevaluated, or quietly retired. On the other side, you have the raw, undeniable sensory data pouring in from the deep, telling a story that grows more and more fantastic. It is a perfect recipe for a classified historical mystery, an unexplored perspective that is actively and systematically suppressed, not just by a shadowy group, but by the very psychology of a large bureaucratic organization unable to cope with an inconvenient reality. The Navy's denial is not a lie in their view. It is a necessity to maintain operational sanity, but the recordings don't lie. They sit in lead-lined boxes in a sub-basement archive, an acoustic graveyard of impossible things. The tooth was a physical object that could be locked away. The manganese dating was a piece of data that could be dismissed. The carbon dating was a lab result that could be lost. But how do you silence the ocean itself? But the real question remained, whispered from one sonar operator to another across the dark. Silent sea. If these sounds were not whales, not submarines, and not geological noise, what was down there in the crushing? Dark so big and so powerful that its very passage through the water left a ghost in the machine. The acoustic phantoms linger in your mind, a persistent, throbbing echo from the abyss. They are compelling evidence, yes, but they are also deeply unsatisfying. A sound is not an object. It cannot be held, measured, or dissected. It is a ghost in the machine, a signal that fades, leaving only the memory of its passing and a deep-seated unease. You understand the psychological need that follows, the craving for tangibility. For a physical anchor to connect these ethereal whispers to the solid, verifiable world. This need forces your investigation away from the cold, electronic warfare of the deep ocean and back into the dusty, cluttered world of paper, ink, and human obsession. You are searching for a bridge between the sound and the tooth, and you find it in the work of one of the 20th century's most brilliant and controversial minds. You are now in the south of France, in the study of a man who was a living paradox. A name on the mailbox reads, Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans. This is our verifiable historical fact. Heuvelmans was not some wild-eyed amateur. He held a doctorate in zoology from the Free University of Brussels. He was a classically trained scientist who, in a profound act of intellectual rebellion, turned his back on the comfortable world of accepted taxonomy to dedicate his life to the science of hidden animals. He was the father of cryptozoology. You see him not as a monster hunter, but as a librarian of the impossible, a man who painstakingly collected and cataloged every report, every photograph, every shred of evidence that mainstream science had deemed unworthy of consideration. He was a curator of the world's discarded data. To understand Heuvelmans is to understand a particular kind of intellectual courage, or perhaps hubris. You analyze his motivation, seeing a man driven by a deep-seated frustration with scientific dogma. He believed that the collective knowledge of humanity, the myths, the legends, the eyewitness accounts of sailors and hunters, contained a signal amidst the noise. He saw the refusal of his peers to investigate these claims not as scientific rigor, but as a failure of imagination, a form of intellectual cowardice. His life's work was a direct challenge to the power structures of academia, and an argument that the map of known reality was not only incomplete but jealously guarded by those who had drawn it. In his view, to dismiss 1,000 stories of a sea serpent was as unscientific as to accept one without proof. His role was to hold the question open, to resist the comforting certainty of a closed case. His home is not a house. It is an archive. Tens of thousands of documents fill filing cabinets that line every wall. Letters from explorers, affidavits from whalers, blurry photographs, newspaper clippings from every continent, all cross-referenced in a system of dizzying complexity. This brings you to the bizarre and quirky detail at the heart of his work. Heuvelmans did not file his subjects by simple zoological categories. He believed that cryptozoological reports often corresponded to ancient archetypal forms, so he created a hybrid system blending Linnaean taxonomy with mythological classification. You find files for draconic serpentines, lacustrine, and neogiant sylvan hominid. You are searching for any record, any tangential mention of an impossibly recent Megalodon tooth. You don't find it under sharks or Pisces. After hours of searching his index, you find it under a strange, almost poetic heading, Category Umbrained Ovis, Artefacta Paradoxica, the paradoxical artifacts of the new shadow. The file is thin, but its contents are explosive. It contains not speculation, but a concrete case file from the early 1950s. It is a transcript of a series of hushed, fearful conversations Heuvelmans had with a retired maritime insurance assessor from Marseille. This assessor had been tasked with evaluating the estate of a wealthy recluse who had died without heirs. In a locked safe, amongst gold bars and bearer bonds, the assessor found a dark, serrated tooth, nearly 7 inches long, mounted on a velvet plaque. Heuvelmans's notes describe it with a clinical precision that perfectly matches the Challenger tooth. The deceased had left a single, cryptic note with it, dredged from the Sundistraight, 1928. It is not old. The assessor, intrigued, used his connections to have a tiny fragment of the tooth escort analyzed by a university geology department. Under the pretense of testing a family heirloom, the result, communicated to him over the phone, was a confused and apologetic statement that the sample appeared surprisingly recent and was likely a clever forgery made from old whalebone. The assessor, disappointed, put the object aside. Days later, he was visited at his office. The visitors were 2 men, impeccably dressed, who introduced themselves as representatives of a Geneva-based foundation for the preservation of unique geological specimens. They knew about the tooth. They knew about the test. They offered him a sum of money that, in his words, was not a purchase price, but a vow of silence. He sold it to them. As they were leaving, he noticed a small detail. The documents they had him sign were embossed with a simple, elegant logo, a perfect spiral contained within an equilateral triangle. It is the exact symbol you saw being added to the Challenger's manifest in 1873. You are looking at Heuvelmans's personal analysis, scribbled in the margins. He connects the story to a dozen other accounts of anomalous artifacts, strange metallic spheres found in coal seams, out-of-place human skeletons that were bought and made to disappear by similarly vague, well-funded organizations. He sees the pattern you saw. This isn't about collecting oddities. This is about information control. Heuvelmans theorized the existence of what he called a parallel academia, an invisible college that operates in the shadows. Its sole purpose to acquire and sequester any object or piece of data that fundamentally threatens the established, public-facing timeline of natural and human history. He saw it as the ultimate expression of power, not just influencing the future, but actively curating the past. The Heuvelmann's file is a Rosetta Stone. It confirms that the Challenger tooth was not a one-off anomaly. It was part of a class of objects, a recurring paradox. And more importantly, it confirms the existence of the hidden hand you've been sensing all along, giving this entity a name, or at least a symbol. The sonar ghost suggested a what swimming in the deep. Heuvelmann's dusty, forgotten file provides the first concrete clue as to who is so desperate to keep it hidden. The story is no longer about a single tooth. It's about a systematic effort, spanning at least a century, to erase every piece of physical evidence for an impossible creature. But the real question remained, a question that even the brilliant Heuvelmanns couldn't answer. Why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to suppress a few old teeth? What truth were they so terrified of that they would build a secret global organization just to hide it? The question hangs in the silence of Heuvelmann's archive. Why? Why this century-long obsessive campaign of suppression? The answer, you reason, will not be found in the calculated actions of secret committees or the bloodless data of scientific instruments. To understand the why, you must understand the terror. You must move from the academic to the visceral, from the artifact to the eyewitness. Your search takes you away from the grand institutions of Europe and across the world to a small, salt-encrusted town on the coast of New South Wales, Australia. Here, in a dusty local maritime museum, you find a new kind of evidence. A simple, leather-bound book, its pages stiff with sea spray and time. It is the logbook of a commercial whaler from the 1920s. The context here is our next verifiable historical fact, and it is a strange one. You are focused on the whaling station at Eden, a place known for a unique and well-documented pact between man and beast, known as the law of the tongue. For decades, the Davidson family of whalers worked in a symbiotic partnership with a pod of orcas. The orcas, led by a legendary bull named Old Tom, would actively herd baleen whales into Twofold Bay, often alerting the whalers by breaching and tail-slapping near the station. In return for their help, after the whalers made their kill, the orcas were allowed to feast on the whale's tongue and lips before the carcass was towed to shore for processing. This was not myth. It was a reliable, documented hunting strategy. This fact is crucial, for it establishes the Eden whalers not as superstitious sailors prone to fantasy, but as some of the most astute and experienced observers of large marine predators in the world. Their lives and livelihoods depended on correctly interpreting the behavior of the giants of the sea. You are holding the personal log of one of these men, a harpooner named Alistair Finch, dated 1924. The book is mostly mundane: weather reports, wind direction, kill counts, repairs to the longboat. It's a portrait of a hard, practical life. You are analyzing the psychology of this man through his words. Finch is not a poet. His language is blunt, economical. He writes about the death of 40-ton animals with the dispassion of a butcher noting his inventory. This is a man desensitized to the everyday brutality of his trade, a man who lives in a world of red water and screaming steel. He is, you conclude, the perfect witness, credible, experienced, and not given to flights of fancy. You turn a page and the tone shatters. The neat, methodical script dissolves into a hurried, jagged scrawl. The entry is from a day in late autumn. The sea was glass, the sky a flat, metallic gray. Finch notes with some anxiety that the orcas, their usually boisterous partners, were nowhere to be seen. The bay was silent, an absence that felt like a presence. Despite this ill omen, they launched their boats, sighting a lone humpback whale far out on the horizon. The hunt was on. They got their harpoon in, a solid strike. And the sleigh ride began, the whale pulling their small boat across the water. Then, something went wrong. The whale, in its agony, began to behave erratically, not just trying to flee, but trying to climb out of the water, its massive body lunging upwards with a terror that went beyond the pain of the harpoon. And then Finch saw why. From the depths, something vast and pale rose to meet the struggling whale. He describes it not as an attack, but as an execution. It was not the frantic, thrashing chaos of a shark-feeding frenzy. It was a single, deliberate act of impossible violence. Finch writes of a flash of sickly scarred chew, white beneath the water, a shape so immense it blotted out the light. He glimpsed a dorsal fin that he says had no right to be, cutting the water like the sail of a black ship. There was a sound, not a bite, but a colossal structural crunch, like a ship's hull collapsing. The 40-foot humpback was seized from below, shaken once and torn in half. The whalers in their tiny boat were suddenly floating in a slick of blood and oil that was not of their making, the two halves of their prize sinking slowly into the abyss. You see the psychological break in the writing? Finch and his crew are left in a profound, ringing silence, their minds unable to process what they have just witnessed. This event didn't just frighten them, it violated their understanding of reality. They knew sharks, big ones. They had seen great whites take seals. This was not that. This was a creature operating on a scale so far beyond their experience that it belonged to a different order of existence. Finch's description is laced with a specific kind of dread. The dread of a man who has just realized that the predator he thought was at the top of the food chain is, in fact, just another link. Here, in the margin of this terrified account, you find the bizarre, quirky detail that resonates with the secrets you have already unearthed. Next to his description of the white ghost shark, Finch has drawn a crude but unmistakable picture of the creature's head as it breached. The jaws are impossibly wide. The eye, a black vacant circle, below the drawing. He has scrawled a phrase that exists in no nautical dictionary. The old man stacks. This is not the law of the tongue, the friendly pact with the orcas. No. This is something else entirely. It's the language of superstition, of a dark covenant. It implies an encounter with a power so absolute and ancient that you don't fight it. You don't even talk about it. You simply pay its due, its tax, with a lost whale, your silence, and your sanity. This phrase suggests a secret lore, a ghost story whispered from one generation of deep-sea whalers to the next about the true king of the sea, the one you pray you never have to pay. It's an unwritten cipher for a truth too terrible to document officially. Naturally, the official station log for that day tells a different story. It simply records the whale as struck and lost. No mention of an attack, no mention of a monster. The station manager, like the naval commander and the lab director, defaults to a simpler, safer narrative. Reporting a sea monster would be financial and social suicide. The event is buried. But Alistair Finch knew what he saw. The experience broke him. His entries become sparse and erratic after that day, and he quit the whaling trade less than a year later, dying a drunk and broken man. The trauma of that one impossible moment on the water unmade him. The logbook provides a soul to the soulless data. The sonar gave you a ghost. The tooth gave you a paradox. Finch's log gives you the terror. It is the missing why. The historical organization with limited public records isn't just hiding a scientific anomaly. They are hiding a primal, world-breaking fear. They are hiding the knowledge that humanity is not the apex. But the real question remained, staring up from the faded, salt-stained page. If the purpose of the secret organization was to suppress all evidence, how did this logbook, this raw testimony of terror, survive? Was it an oversight, or was it left behind intentionally, a warning to anyone who dared to look too closely? Alistair Finch's terrified scrawl provides the emotional core of the mystery, the primal fear that fuels the secrecy. But a whaler's log from the 1920s is still just a story. To connect this terror to the cold, hard data of the modern era to the sonar ghosts, you need a more concrete link. No, you need a modern disaster. An event so thoroughly documented by military technology that it cannot be dismissed as a fisherman's tale. You find that link in the frigid depths of the North Pacific, in an incident that remains one of the Cold War's most enduring and classified historical mysteries. The date is March 8, 1968. You are turning your attention to the catastrophic loss of the Soviet Golf II-class submarine, K2-129. This event is your next verifiable historical fact. A diesel-electric boat armed with 3 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, K2-129, was on a combat patrol when it abruptly sank with all 98 hands, its wreckage coming to rest at a depth of nearly 16,000 feet, roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. The Soviet Navy searched for 2 months and found nothing. The Americans, however, found it. You are now deep inside a secure facility, likely at the National Security Agency, NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland. You are sifting through the acoustic data from the U.S. Navy's SOSUS network, the sound surveillance system. This was a secret globe-spanning web of underwater hydrophones laid on the ocean floor. Designed for the singular purpose of tracking Soviet submarines, it was the electronic ear of the West, listening constantly. On March 8th, multiple SOSUS arrays detected a series of sharp, percussive bangs, followed by the unmistakable, catastrophic acoustic signature of a submarine hull collapsing under immense pressure. The event was triangulated, giving the U.S. Navy the precise location of the doomed K-129. The official explanation, the one that is held for decades, is that the submarine suffered a catastrophic internal explosion, likely from a faulty missile propellant system or a volatile battery hydrogen buildup. It was a tragic accident, a failure of Soviet technology. Case closed. But you, with your access to the raw, unanalyzed data feeds from that day, see a more complex and disturbing picture. You are looking at the acoustic recordings from the hours before the disaster. There, in the data stream, is a familiar phantom. You detect the low-frequency thrum and rapid clicks of the Kartros, staccato, the very same sonar ghost that has been plaguing U.S. Navy operators. This is not a vague signal. It is a clear track. The unidentified acoustic signature is shown to be shadowing the K-129, matching its course and speed with unnerving precision for several hours. Then, the signature changes. The slow thrumming stops. There is a period of silence, and then a new sound appears on the tape's a high frequency. Piercing whine, almost like stressed metal, but with a strange organic modulation. Naval analysts at the time classified it as anomalous machinery noise. It was never connected to the biological signature that preceded it. The final moments of the K-129 are horrifying to listen to. Just before the catastrophic hull collapse, the SOSUS tapes pick up a sharp, metallic screech, followed immediately by a sound that is described in the classified log as a rending impact. It is not the muffled boom of an internal explosion. It is the sound of an external force being applied to the submarine's hull. The subsequent implosion of the pressure hull is the sound of the ocean rushing in to crush the void. You apply a psychological analysis to the official narrative. The internal explosion theory is clean, politically simple, and requires no uncomfortable questions. It reinforces the Western narrative of superior technology and Soviet incompetence. The alternative that something else was down there. Something capable of stalking and destroying a nuclear-armed submarine's unthinkable. It introduces a variable into the neat geopolitical equation of the Cold War that no one in power would be willing to contemplate. Admitting the truth would be an admission of impotence in the face of a power far greater than either superpower possessed. And here, in the classified files surrounding the K-129, you find the truly bizarre detail. After the Americans located the wreck, the CIA launched one of the most audacious and expensive intelligence operations in history, Project Azorian. The public story was that the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes was building a massive ship, the Glomar Explorer, to mine manganese nodules from the seabed. This was an elaborate cover. The ship's true purpose was to lift the entire front two-thirds of the K-129 from the ocean floor to recover its codebooks, communication gear, and nuclear warheads, as much as public record. But you have found a subfile within the Project Azorian operational plan. A file designated Contingency 9, Biomechanical Interference. This section of the plan outlines a series of non-lethal deterrent protocols to be used by the Glomar Explorer if the recovery operation was interrupted by large-scale aggressive marine life. The protocols are strange. They don't involve explosives. They involve the deployment of powerful low-frequency acoustic emitters designed to create a sonic barrier. It also details the use of a chemical agent codenamed H-Thioropel-7, a potent synthetic pheromone designed to mimic the scent of a decaying shark carcass, a universal signal of disease and danger in the marine world. This is a stunning revelation. The CIA, in planning one of its most sensitive operations, was not just worried about the Soviet Navy showing up. They were actively preparing for a potential confrontation with the very entity that may have destroyed the submarine in the first place. This is not the action of an agency that believes in the internal explosion theory. This is the action of an agency that has seen the same classified sonar data you have, and has drawn the terrifying timer, logical conclusion. They know something is down there. The secret organization, the one Heuvelmans theorized about, the one with the spiral triangle symbol its influence, is palpable here. They are not just hiding a tooth anymore. They are now actively managing the operational realities of a world where their secret is a physical threat to national security assets. The coincidence is too perfect. The acoustic ghost that haunted sonar operators is present at the scene of a major international incident. The official story meticulously ignores its presence, while the most secret echelons of the intelligence community are quietly preparing to deal with it. The K-129 was not just a tragic accident. It appears to be the first confirmed kill. But the real question remained, a question that must have been asked in the most secret rooms of the Pentagon and the CIA. If the Glomar Explorer had successfully lifted the submarine, what marks would they have found on its hull? And was the failure to recover the entire submarine a technical mishap, or was the most damaged and most revealing section intentionally left behind? The question of what marks might have been found on the K-129's hull is a chilling one, a mystery deliberately left at the bottom of the Pacific. Project Azorian recovered secrets, but the true nature of the submarine's demise was allowed to sink back into the abyssal silence. You understand that this is a pattern. When a physical clue becomes too dangerous, the narrative managers shift their focus, allowing the evidence to be lost to the depths. But the depths themselves can speak. The investigation must follow the evidence, and the trail now leads you down. Deeper than any submarine can travel, to the most remote and hostile environment on Earth, you are descending into the Mariana Trench. The destination is Challenger Deep, the planet's nadir, a place of unimaginable pressure and absolute darkness nearly 7 miles beneath the surface. Our verifiable fact is the ongoing scientific exploration of these hadal zones. Since the bathyscaphe Trieste first touched down in 1960, a succession of increasingly sophisticated remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and autonomous landers have been sent into this inner world armed with cameras, sensors, and, most importantly, highly sensitive hydrophones. You are in the control room of a state-of-the-art Japanese research vessel, the Shinkai Maru, sometime in the mid-1990s. The atmosphere is one of hushed, reverent focus. This is not the tense, adrenaline-fueled environment of a naval submarine. This is a floating laboratory, staffed by scientists who speak in the precise, clipped tones of their respective disciplines. On a bank of high-definition screens, you watch the feed from your ROV, the Keiko T-Chen. As it descends through the endless night, the numbers on the depth gauge are staggering. A constant reminder that you are observing a realm more alien and less understood than the surface of the moon. The mission's primary goal is to deploy a new type of hydrophone array. It's designed to listen for the faint geological murmurs that might precede deep ocean earthquakes. The scientists are hunting for subtle shifts in the tectonic plates, listening to the planet's heartbeat. The hydrophone array is deployed, settles on the silty floor of the trench, and the control room falls silent as the first audio feed is patched through. The sound is exactly what they expect, an almost perfect, profound silence, punctuated by the occasional distant creak of the planet's crust. It is the sound of a world without life as we know it, a sound of immense pressure and geological time. For hours, the data is clean, the baseline steady. The team begins to relax. Then, a new sound begins to fade in. It is not biological. It is not geological. It is a sound that has no business being there. You listen, and a cold knot tightens in your stomach. It is a slow, rhythmic, grinding noise. The sound is deeply resonant, powerful, and unmistakably metallic. It is the sound of two massive metal surfaces being forcibly scraped against one another. It conjures images of a colossal industrial process, of a foundry or a quarry operating in the crushing darkness. The science team is thrown into confusion. The immediate logical assumption is equipment malfunction. Is it the ROV's manipulator arm scraping against its own chassis? Is it feedback in the miles-long fiber optic cable? They run a full suite of remote diagnostics. The ROV is powered down to minimal systems. The manipulator arm is frozen, but the sound continues, unabated. It is external. It is real. You witness the familiar psychological schism. The geologists are baffled, the engineers are defensive, and the lead oceanographer is deeply unsettled. Their paradigm has no space for this. The Mariana Trench is supposed to be a place of delicate, ethereal life forms and slow geological processes. The sound they are hearing is violent, industrial, and powerful, speaks of force and machinery. The official log entry, you note, is a masterpiece of scientific equivocation. Anomalous acoustic event of mechanical character recorded, source undetermined, likely related to cable tension or previously uncharted hydrothermal vent activity. The data is flagged, but it is neutralized by a plausible, if unsupported, explanation. It is safer to assume an error than to confront the implication that something is operating, something is working, in the deepest part off the ocean. But there is one man in the control room who is not confused. He is electrified. He is a visiting researcher from a Japanese conglomerate that helped fund the expedition, a man whose presence has been a source of quiet curiosity. His specialization is not oceanography or geology. He is a biometallurgist. This is our bizarre, quirky detail. His name is Dr. Kenji Tanaka, and he is a known, if eccentric, correspondent of the Phonetic Order of the Abyss, the group of fringe acousticians you encountered earlier. Tanaka's personal obsession, the theory that got him ostracized from mainstream academia, is that of lithoautotrophs, not organisms that feed on light or chemicals, but organisms that have evolved to directly consume and metabolize metallic ores from the planet's crust. He believes that the mineral-rich smoker vents of the deep sea are not just ecosystems. They are feeding grounds for a type of life that is part geological, part biological. He has been searching for acoustic proof of his theory, the sound of a creature mining. As the others express their confusion, you see Tanaka surreptitiously making a copy of the audio file onto a personal data drive. In his private notebook, you see him sketch a complex waveform, the visual representation of the grinding sound. He doesn't label it anomalous mechanical noise. He gives it a name, a designation from his own secret lexicon, a cipher that is both poetic and terrifying. He calls it the Ma's Forge. For him, this sound is not an anomaly. It is the culmination of his life's work. That is the sound of a biological factory operating on a planetary scale. It suddenly reframes the entire mystery. What if the rending impact on the K-129 wasn't an act of aggression, but an act of consumption? What if this creature, this ancient survivor, does not just hunt, but harvests? This provides a motive far more terrifying than simple predation. It suggests that our technology, our proud steel ships and submarines, are not just intruders in its world. To a creature that forages for metal on the seabed, they might be seen as a novel and convenient source of high-grade, pre-processed, or, we are not just trespassers, we're a buffet. This horrifying perspective offers a potential explanation for the Challenger tooth's strange chemistry. If a creature's metabolism is based on processing metals, it could create localized chemical reactions on the seabed that would dramatically accelerate the deposition of manganese, making an object appear thousands of years old when it is in fact much younger. It all begins to connect. The impossible dating, the sonar ghosts, the destroyed submarine, and now the sound of a forge in the abyss. But the real question remained, echoing in the metallic grinding from the planet's deepest wound, if such a creature exists. One that forges and feeds in the dark, and it has now discovered the rich veins of metal we trail across the surface of its world. What is to stop it from coming up from the depths to collect its due? The idea of a metal-eating creature from the abyss, a lithoautotroph, is a terrifying leap of logic, a theory born from a single, grinding sound. It's a hypothesis that feels more like science fiction than science. But what if the evidence for such a thing wasn't confined to one anomalous recording? What if a global system had been documenting its existence for decades, all while meticulously hiding the truth from the very people it was designed to protect? You pull back from the specific incident in the Mariana Trench and ascend to a global strategic perspective. You are returning to the height of the Cold War, but your focus is no longer on the hunter-killer submarines prowling the deep. Instead, you are looking at the vast, silent, and stationary web that watched them all, the U.S. Navy's Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS. This is our next verifiable historical fact, a secret of immense strategic importance that was only declassified in the 1990s. SOSUS was a network of colossal hydrophone arrays laid directly on the seafloor. connected by thousands of miles of undersea cable to shore-based processing stations called naval facilities or naval facies. Its purpose was singular and profound, to make the entire ocean transparent. From these quiet, isolated stations, sonar technicians could track the movement of a single Soviet submarine from the moment it left port. It was arguably the single most effective intelligence-gathering tool of the entire Cold War, the crown jewel of naval surveillance. You are now inside one of these UNAVFCS, perhaps on the rugged, windswept coast of Iceland, or tucked away in the misty landscape of the Azores. The year is irrelevant, as the scene is timeless. You're in a secure, windowless room known as the Evaluation Center. The air is cool and smells faintly of ozone and stale coffee. Before you is a bank of spectrographic displays, waterfalls of color representing the acoustic life of an entire ocean basin. You are a low-ranking sailor, an oceanographic systems technician, doing one of the most sensitive jobs in the world. Your task, hour after hour, day after day, is to listen. You are trained to filter out the cacophony of the sea, the songs of whales, the chatter of dolphins, the groan of shifting ice, and isolate the faint telltale signatures of man-made machinery. The psychology of this job is paramount. It is a task of ruthless categorization. Every sound must be identified and placed in a box: biological, geological, or mechanical, friendly, neutral, or Soviet. And most of the time, the system works perfectly. But then there are the other sounds, the ones that don't fit in any box. These are the signals that were officially designated as anomalous biologicals or unresolved transients and subsequently ignored. But amongst the technicians, these sounds earned a more evocative nickname: the howlers. They were the acoustic oddities that defied the training manuals. You listen to a recording of one now? It's not the Cartro staccato you heard from the submarine, nor is it the maws forged from the trench. Something different, yet related along mournful. Resonant tone that seems to build and then abruptly cut off, followed by a sound like a vast sheet of metal being buckled. The computer classifies it as a seismic event paired with a distant freighter collision. But it happens again and again. It's always in the same sequence. This is where you discover the next bizarre, almost defiant detail. In the NavFac library, tucked behind a shelf of outdated training manuals, you find an unofficial logbook. It's a simple 3-ring binder, filled with thermal paper printouts of spectrographic displays. This is the Ghost Log, a secret, unauthorized archive kept by generations of technicians. A record of all the sounds they were told to forget. Each entry is annotated with the date, time, and the operator's personal notes. Here, the howlers are not dismissed. They are studied, categorized, and given names. You see entries for the bell, the whip, and the organ, and here you find the cipher, the shared secret language of the listeners. For each major recurring anomaly, they have created a symbol. The symbol for the sound you're hearing now, the mournful tone and buckling metal, is a long, smooth wave abruptly shattered by a jagged lightning bolt. It's a visual poem of acoustic violence. Flipping through this ghost log, you realize the horrifying truth. The sonar ghosts that plagued individual submarines, the grinding sound from the trench thieves, were not isolated events. The SOSUS network heard them constantly. The sounds were so frequent, so widespread, that they were becoming a problem. They were clogging the system, generating thousands of false positives that distracted from the primary mission of tracking Soviet boats. The institutional psychology of the Navy demanded a solution. The response was not to investigate this global mystery. The response was to eliminate the noise. You uncover the name of a classified software protocol, a program that was the ultimate expression of institutional denial. Project Neptune's Ghost. It was a sophisticated filtering algorithm installed across the entire SOS network in the mid-1970s. Its purpose was simple: to use the massive, growing library of howler recordings to create a set of acoustic fingerprints. The software would then listen for these fingerprints in the live data stream. When one was detected, the algorithm would not flag it for an operator. It would silently, automatically erase it from the main display and shunt the raw data to a separate, deeply classified archive codenamed Tartarus. The operators and their commanders would never even know the sound had occurred. The ghost log becomes obsolete because the ghosts have been exorcised from the machine. This is a stunning act of willful blindness on a global scale. The Navy didn't solve the mystery. They simply programmed their multi-billion-dollar listening network to ignore it. They chose a clean, manageable operational picture over a chaotic and terrifying reality. The historical organization with limited public records you've been tracking, you realize, may not have even needed to intervene directly. The military-sown culture of rigid categorization and its psychological aversion to unclassifiable threats did the work for them. They built a system that censored reality by default. But the real question remained, and it is perhaps the most profound of all. Why? Why create such an elaborate system of self-deception? If a potential threat was so pervasive that it required a dedicated filter to hide it, why keep the fleet, the submarine captains, and the battle group commanders in the dark, leaving them vulnerable to a danger they didn't even know existed? The question left by Project Neptune's ghost is a paradox of military logic. Why invest billions in a system to detect threats, only to install a secondary system to deliberately ignore the most persistent and inexplicable one? Why leave your own fleet blind? You delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of Cold War intelligence, and you realize the premise of the question is flawed. They didn't leave the fleet blind. They just ensured that only a very select few were allowed to see. The flow of information wasn't stopped. It was rerouted into a hidden, parallel channel. Your investigation now takes you from the acoustic world of SOSUS to the even more secretive domain of signals intelligence, SIGINTs, and cryptography. The verifiable historical backdrop is the complex and paranoid world of Cold War naval communications. Every message of any importance was cloaked in layers of encryption, often using one-time pads or complex machine ciphers that were, for all practical purposes, unbreakable. A constant, invisible war was waged in the electromagnetic spectrum, with each side desperately trying to decipher the other's intentions through intercepted radio traffic. It was a world of absolute secrecy, where a single decrypted message could alter the course of history. You are now a naval cryptographer, stationed at a remote listening post somewhere on the Iberian Peninsula in the late 1970s. Your job is a form of sensory deprivation. You exist in a soundproofed room, staring at strings of alphanumeric gibberish, searching for patterns, for whispers of meaning in the digital static. You are a high priest of a secret order, turning chaos into intelligence. Your life is governed by procedure, by clearance levels, and by the cardinal rule. You do not ask questions about the content of the messages you decrypt. You are a conduit, not an analyst. One night, an unusual transmission is automatically flagged by the system. It's a short burst transmission, originating not from a Soviet vessel, but from a U.S. Navy oceanographic research ship, known cover for a spy vessel operating in the mid-Atlantic. The message is flagged because it doesn't conform to any standard naval encryption protocol. It's using a hybrid cipher, one part of which the system recognizes, but the other part is utterly alien. It is routed to your terminal for manual analysis. This is where you encounter the bizarre, almost philosophical quirk in the code. After hours of work, you manage to crack the first layer. It's a modified Vigenère cipher, but the key isn't a word or a phrase from a codebook. It's the key you discover through painstaking frequency analysis. It's a repeating alphanumeric string that represents the primary protein sequence of shark collagen, the very protein that was extracted from the Challenger tooth for the carbon dating test that was subsequently erased. It's a chillingly specific, esoteric key, a form of biological password. This is not a standard military cipher. This is a message from one specialist to another, sealed with a secret handshake made of amino acids. Applying this key, you unlock the second layer of the message. It's not text, it's a raw data string, which you reconstruct into two distinct parts. The first is a set of marine coordinates. They are precise to 6 decimal places. Out of professional habit, you plot them on a digital map. They point to a featureless expanse of the North Atlantic, thousands of miles from any major shipping lane or strategic landmark. There is nothing there, but you remember the Tartarus archive, the digital graveyard of sounds erased by Project Neptune's ghost. On a hunch, you cross-reference the coordinates with the hidden archive. The location is not random at all. It is the geometric center of one of the most intense and persistent clusters of howler activity ever recorded. It is a nest. The second part of the data string is even stranger. It's a vector graphic, a simple line drawing transmitted as a series of plotting commands. As the image renders on your screen, a cold dread washes over you. It is a new symbol, a new piece of the secret language you have been deciphering. You've seen the spiral in a triangle, the circle with a dot, the jagged waveforms. This is different. This is an escalation. The symbol is a perfect double helix of DNA, but it is not intertwined with another helix.
Ow.
It is wrapped tightly, almost constrictingly, around a single, unmistakable shape, a mechanical gear. You stare at the image, which has been christened in the file's header with its operational name, the Azorian cipher. The name itself is a thunderclap of realization. It directly links this message to the K-129 disaster and the Glomar explorer's partial recovery. This is not a historical artifact. It is fresh intelligence. You're looking at an update. The psychological impact is immense. You understand now that you have accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation between members of Heuvelmans. It's parallel academia, the historical organization that has been managing this secret for over a century. They are embedded within the Navy, using its assets, its ships, its cryptographers, to conduct their own far older war. The symbol is a terrifying synthesis of everything you've learned. The DNA helix represents the biological entity, the ancient survivor. The gear represents the Maw's forge, the metallic grinding, the biomechanical harvesting, the theory of a creature that consumes not just flesh, but our very technology. This symbol is not a name, it is a diagnosis. It is a statement that their understanding of the creature has fundamentally changed. It is no longer just a shark, however large. It is something that blurs the line between life and machine, something that has incorporated the industrial world into its own biology. The silence of the Navy, the erasure of the SOS data, it all makes a new, more sinister kind of sense. You don't tell your fleet about a monster you can't kill. And you certainly don't tell them that the monster is learning, adapting, and has developed a taste for steel. But the real question remained. Burning on your screen in the form of the cryptic message, this was clearly a message from one member of the secret organization to another. But if the sender was on a spy ship in the middle of the ocean, who and where was the intended recipient? And what event had prompted them to update their symbol for the creature to something so horrifyingly new? The Azorian cipher is a key, unlocking a new level of the conspiracy. It proves that the parallel academia theorized by Heuvelmans is not just a passive collector of artifacts. It is an active, technologically advanced network embedded within the highest levels of global naval intelligence. The symbol of the DNA helix wrapped around a gear is a chilling mission statement, a declaration that their subject is evolving. The question of who the cipher was for and what it meant drives you deeper into the shadow world. You need a name, a history, a structure for this organization. You begin to search for the intersection of vast wealth, a multi-generational obsession with natural history, and a documented preference for absolute secrecy. Your investigation leads you to a verifiable historical personage, Baron Leopold von Schreiber, 19th century German industrialist and nobleman. He made an immense fortune in steel manufacturing and armaments, but his true passion was natural philosophy and zoology. A contemporary and rival of Darwin, Schreiber publicly championed a rigid, divinely ordered view of the natural world. But privately, his fascination lay with the exceptions, the anomalies, the monsters that defied his neat.
Clockwork universe?
This is our established historical detail. He funded expeditions around the globe, but unlike his peers who sought to fill museums, Schreiber's acquisitions were rarely, if ever, seen again. You are in a private library in Geneva, having gained access to the Baron's sealed personal archives. The air is dry and smells of old paper and leather. Here you find the founding documents, the bizarre and chilling charter of the organization he created in 1868. It was not a scientific society. It was a private trust, an inheritance passed down not through blood, but through ideology. He named it the Typhon Group. The name itself is a cipher. In Greek mythology, Typhon was the most terrifying of all monsters, a colossal, godlike entity that challenged Zeus himself for supremacy of the cosmos. He was the father of all other monsters. The name reveals the group's core philosophy. They see themselves not as hunters of mere creatures, but as the wardens of a primal, chaotic power that predates and threatens the established order of the world. As you read the charter, you analyze the Baron's psychology. He was a man of immense control, a master of industry who believed he could impose order on anything. The existence of creatures that did not fit his worldview was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a personal affront, a flaw in the fabric of reality that he felt compelled to manage. The Typhon Group's mission, as he laid it out, was twofold. First, to acquire and sequester any biological or archaeological evidence, what he called existential threats to the modern paradigm, that could cause widespread panic or disrupt the orderly progress of human civilization. This explains the collection of the teeth. Second, and far more disturbing, their mission was to study these entities in absolute secrecy, to understand their power, and, if possible, to find a way to control or weaponize it. They were not just hiding monsters, they were trying to tame them. This brings you to the truly bizarre and quirky detail of their organization. The Typhon Group's internal structure is not based on a corporate or military hierarchy. It is modeled after a medieval chivalric order. Members are not employees. They are knights and squires. They are inducted in a secret ceremony where they swear an oath of absolute loyalty, not to a country, but to the preservation of the Veil. The group is led by a Grand Master, and its inner circle is called the Chapter of St. George, a direct and deeply ironic reference to the legendary Dragon Slayer. Their internal communications, you discover, are filled with this anachronistic, pseudo-mystical terminology. An active field agent is a knight errant. A secure archive, it's like the one holding the Challenger tooth, is a reliquary. A creature like Megalodon is referred to not by a scientific name, but by a code name from their own bestiary, chalybs, the Latin word for steel. They knew, even in the 19th century, about its connection to metal. You see now how they operate. They recruit from the highest echelons of science, finance, industry, and the military. A promising young geochemist, a brilliant cryptographer, high-ranking naval officer, all are subtly identified and cultivated for years before being approached for induction. Their loyalty is absolute. Their resources are virtually limitless. Their timeline is not measured in years or decades, but in generations. They are playing a very, very long game. The Azorian cipher was a message passed from one knight to another, an update on the status of chalybs. The symbol of the spiral in the triangle is their public-facing mark used for acquisitions. The DNA and gear symbol is an internal operational sigil, a piece of a far more complex symbolic language used only by initiated members. The group's obsession with extinct apex predators now makes a terrifying kind of sense. It is not a hobby, it is their singular focus. They see these creatures as living weapons of mass destruction, forces of nature whose mere existence is a threat to human dominance. They are the secret keepers of the apocalypse, the men who watch the dragons sleeping in the deep. Their actions, suppressing the teeth, erasing the data, filtering the SOSUS feeds, are not motivated by a simple desire for secrecy. They are motivated by a profound, aristocratic, and deeply arrogant belief that only they, the chosen few, have the wisdom and fortitude to handle this truth. They are protecting humanity in their view by treating us like children who cannot be told about the monster under the bed. The discovery of the Typhon Group connects all the disparate threads: the tooth, the sonar ghosts, the K-129, the Azorian cipher, provides the who and the why. You are no longer investigating a mystery. You're uncovering a secret war. A war fought in archives and laboratories and in the silent depths of the sea. A war whose existence has been a carefully guarded secret for more than 150 years. But the real question remained. A question that cut to the very heart of the Typhon Group's mission. If their goal was to control the creature they called chalybs, what did the new symbol, the DNA intertwined with the gear, truly signify? Was it a sign that they were succeeding, or a terrifying admission that they were losing control? The Typhon Group's existence provides a framework for the conspiracy, but their motives remain shrouded in chivalric secrecy. Are they wardens or would-be masters? The question of control hangs heavy in the air. To find the answer, you must find a crack in their perfect generational armor. You need a confession, a voice from inside the machine, a message from a dying man who has nothing left to lose. Your search leads you away from the grand narratives of secret societies and into the quiet personal tragedy of a single, brilliant scientist. You are at a university archive in California, looking at the donated papers of Dr. Miles Croft, a celebrated paleoceanographer who passed away in the late 1980s. This is your verifiable historical detail. Dr. Miles Croft was a giant in his field, pioneer in the analysis of deep-sea sediment cores. These cores are like ice cores for the ocean-long cylinders of mud drilled from the seabed that provide a layered, chronological record of the Earth's climate, chemistry, and biological history stretching back millions of years. His work helped define our modern understanding of the ice ages and the long, slow cycles of planetary change. He was a pillar of the scientific establishment, a man whose entire career was built on the meticulous interpretation of geological time. You are examining his later work, specifically his analyses of sediment cores taken from the abyssal plains of the South Pacific. The published papers are masterpieces of scientific prose, dense with data but clear in their conclusions. They paint a picture of a stable, predictable deep-ocean environment, reinforcing the consensus that large, air-breathing marine creatures like Megalodon could not have survived the cooling oceans and collapsing food chains of the late Pliocene epoch. His work was, in essence, the final nail in the coffin for any serious scientific debate about the creature's survival. He proved through the geological record that it was impossible. But as you dig deeper into his personal effects, you find a sealed envelope tucked inside a first-edition copy of Moby Dick. The envelope is addressed to whoever finds this. It is a deathbed letter. The writing is weak and shaky, the confession of a man burdened by a secret he can no longer carry to the grave. The letter begins with a simple, devastating sentence. Almost everything I published after 1965 was a lie. Dr. Miles Croft, you learned from his confession, was a member of the Typhon Group. He was inducted as a young, ambitious postdoc. Seduced by the group's vast resources and its promise of access to a hidden world of knowledge, his role as a knight of the chapter of St. George was to be their gatekeeper of the geological record. His job was not to discover the truth, but to shape it. He was tasked with creating a robust, scientifically unimpeachable firewall of evidence that would prove the Megalodon's extinction, thereby providing a permanent academic justification for dismissing any future anomalous findings. He was the chief architect of the lie. You can feel the man's profound psychological torment in his words. He was a scientist who loved truth, forced to spend his life meticulously fabricating falsehoods. He describes the process with a chilling precision. He writes of selectively contaminating core samples to alter their magnetic polarity, readings of subtly manipulating isotopic data to create the illusion of ancient temperature shifts that never happened, and of cherry-picking microfossil data to a false timeline of marine extinctions. He was a master artist, painting a picture of a past that never was. His work wasn't just wrong. It was a brilliant, targeted act of intellectual sabotage, designed to lead the entire scientific community down a dead-end path. This is where you find the bizarre, almost heartbreakingly quirky detail. Throughout his confession, Miles Croft doesn't refer to the creature as Megalodon, or even by the Typhon Group's codename Challenger. He uses a single cryptic initial, A. He writes, "My work was to prove A could not have survived. The irony is that A's survival proves my work was necessary." The letter A is not from Latin or Greek. It is from the runic alphabet of the ancient Norse, the rune Ansus. In runic lore, Ansus is the rune of Odin, the god of wisdom, poetry, and magic. But it is also a rune of communication, of messages, of divine inspiration. It is the rune of a voice from the abyss. By using this symbol, Miles Croft is doing something extraordinary. He is rejecting the Typhon Group's classification of the creature as a monster typhon or a resource Challenger. He is reclassifying it, in the final moments of his life, as something else entirely. A source of knowledge, a sentient message, a voice. His letter reveals the internal schism that was tearing the Typhon Group apart. The older faction, the Wardens, led by traditionalists, believed in the original mission, to simply hide the creature, to maintain the veil. But a new, younger faction was rising to power, the Harnessers. They were not content to just watch. They saw a not as a threat to be hidden, but as a strategic asset to be controlled. They were the ones pushing the biomechanical theories, the ones who saw a living weapon in the depths. Milescroft, a warden at heart, was horrified by their ambition. By their reckless desire to ride the dragon, his life's work of lies, he confesses, was a desperate double-edged sword. On one hand, it upheld the Typhon Group's veil of secrecy. On the other, he hoped it would convince the harnessers that the creature was truly safely extinct, causing them to abandon their dangerous obsession with controlling it. He was lying to the world to protect it, and lying to his own secret society to try and save it from itself. His confession ends with a final, chilling warning. The harnessers, he writes, were close to a breakthrough. They believed they had found a way to communicate with, and perhaps even influence. Using a combination of low-frequency, sonar, and electromagnetic pulses, technological attempt to replicate the voice of the Ansu's rune. His last words are a plea. They think they are forging a key. They are only ringing the dinner bell. The letter is a bombshell. It reveals not only the depth of the deception, but the internal power struggle driving it. The Typhon Group is not a monolith. It is a house divided, and the schism is between those who fear the monster and those who want to leash it. The symbol of the DNA helix in the gear was not a diagnosis. It was a declaration of victory by the harnesser faction. But the real question remained, a question that Milescroft himself could not answer. He had dedicated his life to building a scientific prison of lies around the creature. Was it enough to convince the harnessers to stop, or had his brilliant deception merely given them the time and cover they needed to perfect their terrifying key? Dr. Milescroft's confession is a ghost in your hands, the final desperate message from a man who spent his life building a prison of lies. His warning about the harnesser faction and their attempts to ring the dinner bell creates a chilling new context for the entire mystery. The Typhon Group is no longer a unified force of silent wardens. It is a fractured entity at war with itself, with one faction actively trying to provoke the very power the other sought to hide. You wonder if Milescroft's great deception, his manufactured geological timeline, was enough to deter them. You suspect it was not. To find out, you must look for the evidence of the harnesser's work in the field. Your search takes you from the sterile archives of academia to the humid, teeming jungles and crystalline waters of Southeast Asia, specifically to the long, narrow island of Palawan in the Philippines. Our verifiable historical fact is this. In the 1960s, on Palawan Island, a team of archaeologists discovered the fossilized remains of Taban man. These bone fragments, found deep inside the Taban caves, were, at the time, oldest human remains ever discovered in the Philippines, radically pushing back the known timeline of human settlement in the region. The discovery turned Palawan into a site of global paleoanthropologic importance. It is a place where the deep past is not an abstraction. It is a tangible reality, buried in the limestone cliffs and hidden in the jungle earth. Palawan is an island accustomed to discoveries that rewrite history. You are now in a small fishing village on the island's west coast in the early 1990s. The village clings to a narrow strip of land between the dense, mountainous jungle and the deep, dark waters of the Sulu Sea. Life here is governed by the tides and the seasons, a world away from the clandestine power struggles of the Typhon Group. A young pearl diver, searching the shallow water coral gardens near the mouth of an underwater cave system, finds something that does not belong. It is not a pearl or a shell. It is a large, black serrated triangle, half buried in the sand. It is heavy, cool to the touch, and impossibly perfect. It's a tooth. He has never seen anything like it. Brings it back to the village, where it becomes an object of wonder and speculation. The news travels slowly, by word of mouth and Interior ferry. It reaches a local university, and then a regional museum. But before any official scientific expedition can be mounted, a different kind of visitor arrives in the village. He is a European, impeccably dressed for the tropical heat, who introduces himself as a private anthropological consultant representing a Swiss Cultural Heritage Foundation. He speaks the local dialect fluently. He is, of course, a knight errant of the Typhon Group. You observe the psychological transaction that follows. For the village, the tooth is a treasure, a source of pride, a potential tourist draw, a link to the mythic past of their islands. For the Typhon agent, it is a contamination, a breach in the veil, a problem to be swiftly and silently resolved. He does not use threats or intimidation. He uses the most powerful weapon of all, money. He offers to fund a new school for the village, to repair the pier, to buy a new engine for every fishing boat. The price is not just for the tooth, but for the story of the tooth. He is buying their memory. The village, faced with a choice between a mysterious relic and a tangible, life-changing future, makes the logical choice. The tooth is sold. The story becomes a forgotten local anecdote. But this is where you witness the change. This is no longer a simple acquisition, a cleanup operation by the warden faction. This agent is a harnesser, and he is operating under a new, more aggressive protocol. After the deal is done, you watch him that night as he works on the tooth in his quiet hotel room. He does not pack it away for shipment to a reliquary. Instead, he drills a tiny, almost invisible hole into its route. Into this hole, he inserts a small, complex piece of microtechnology, a device that looks like a grain of sand, but is, in fact, a passive acoustic resonator, keyed to a specific ultra-low frequency, then seals the hole with a composite material that is chemically identical to the fossilized dentin. The tooth is now bugged. The next day, he charters a boat and, with the original diver as his guide, returns to the underwater cave where the tooth was found. He explains that he wants to document the geological context of the find. Under the water, he doesn't take notes or photographs, places the doctored tooth back where it was found, wedging it deep into a crevice. But he leaves something else with it. He attaches a small, unassuming, limpet-shaped object to the cave wall. It is a sophisticated, self-powered sensor pod, designed to monitor the acoustic resonator in the tooth. If the tooth moves, if the creature that shed it returns to the area, and its unique bioelectric field interacts with the resonator, this sensor will activate, sending a single, encrypted burst transmission to a listening post in orbit. This is the bizarre, horrifying detail of the new doctrine. This is the harnesser method. It has a code name in the Typhon files you later uncover. Project Judas Steer. The name is a dark, cynical cipher. A Judas Steer is a bull that is trained to lead other cattle to a slaughterhouse, its own life spared to betray the others. In this protocol, the lost artifacts, the teeth, are no longer just pieces of evidence to be hidden. They are being turned into bait. They are being used as lures to draw the creature back, to map its territory, to pinpoint its location. The harnessers are not waiting for the monster to show itself. They're actively hunting it, using its own lost biology as the bait in their high-tech trap. The action on Palawan changes everything. It confirms Dr. Miles Croft's worst fears. The harnesser faction is in control, and they are escalating. They have moved from passive observation and suppression to active pursuit. The discovery of the Palawan tooth was not a problem for them. It was an opportunity. They are transforming the very nature of the conspiracy from one of hiding the past to one of weaponizing it. But the real question remained, a question that made your blood run cold. The Judas Steer protocol is ingenious, but it relies on a critical assumption that another tooth would be found. Was the Palawan discovery a random stroke of luck that the harnessers capitalized on? Or was it the first sign that they were now somehow seeding these discoveries themselves, dropping their bait into the ocean and waiting for someone to find it? The Judas Steer protocol transforms the nature of the mystery. The Typhon Group's harnesser faction is no longer just watching. They are actively fishing in the abyss, using their collection of paradoxical artifacts as bait. The question of whether the Palawan discovery was luck or design lingers in your mind. But while they are hunting for a sign of the creature's presence, the creature itself may be leaving calling cards of a far more dramatic and destructive nature.
Ow.
You need to find evidence of its activity. A modern equivalent of Alistair Finch's white ghost shark encounter, not a story from a dead where, but a solid industrial fact from the modern age. Your investigation leads you to the oil and gas industry, a world of staggering engineering and high-stakes risk that operates on the new frontier, the deep ocean. The verifiable historical context is the relentless march of offshore oil drilling into ever deeper waters. By the early 2000s, engineering had advanced to the point where companies could establish and operate production platforms in thousands of feet of water. These are not simple rigs. They're technological marvels, cities on stilts tethered to the seabed by colossal steel and concrete structures. all monitored by a vast array of sensors and ROVs. They are islands of human industry in the vast wilderness of the ocean. You are now focusing on a specific and very real piece of infrastructure. The Petronas oil platform operated in the Gulf of Mexico. It was one of the tallest freestanding structures in the world, a monument to human ingenuity drilled into the seabed at a depth of nearly 2,000 feet. For years, it operated flawlessly, a vital node in the global energy network. Then, in the fall of 2003, it was abruptly and completely evacuated in advance of Hurricane Ivan, a powerful Category 5 storm. After the hurricane passed, the platform was found to be still standing, but it had sustained significant and puzzling damage. The official report, filed with federal regulators, cited the cause as unprecedented loop currents and vortex-induced vibrations caused by the hurricane. The damage was repaired, and the platform was brought back online. This official explanation is plausible, but you have gained access to a parallel report, an internal damage assessment filed not with the government, but with a specialist maritime insurance syndicate, one you recognize as a known financial front for the Typhoon Group. This report tells a very different story. You are examining the raw footage from the post-hurricane inspection. Time-stamped 2 full days before the hurricane's peak winds reached the platform's location. The rig was already abandoned, a ghost city of steel in an unnaturally calm sea. The footage is grainy, lit by the ROV's powerful lights against the crushing blackness of the deep. The ROV pilot is methodically inspecting the rig's main support spar, a massive column of reinforced steel that anchors the entire structure to the seabed. The pilot's voice on the audio feed is calm, professional, but you can hear a growing edge of disbelief. He is reporting a series of deep crescent-shaped gouges in the steel spar at a depth of around 800 feet. The gouges are enormous, some over 20 feet long. The edges of the torn metal are curled back, indicative of a colossal shearing force. The pilot states, his voice strained, "I've never seen anything like this. This isn't storm damage. This looks like a bite." You pause the footage, and the phrase hangs in the silence. The psychological weight of that word bite is immense. It is a biological term applied to a geological scale industrial object. It is a category error of terrifying proportions. You run a digital analysis on the image, tracing the curve of the gouges. You then overlay this curve with a scaled-up schematic of a megalodon's jaw, based on the dimensions of the Challenger tooth. The match is not just close, it is perfect. The spacing of the individual gouges perfectly matches the spacing of the serrated teeth in the prehistoric predator-esque jaw. This is the phantom bite, a piece of physical evidence so direct and so damning that it almost defies belief. But the truly bizarre and chilling detail is not the bite mark itself. It is what the ROV finds inside the bite mark. As the camera zooms in on one of the deepest gouges, you see something embedded in the torn steel. It is not marine growth. It is a fragment of a foreign object, something dark and chiseled. The ROV's manipulator arm is ordered to retrieve it.
Back on the surface, it is analyzed.
It is not rock, it is a piece of enamel. Specifically, it is the tip of a massive serrated tooth, which has been sheared off by the force of the impact with the rig's steel leg. And when this fragment is subjected to a spectrographic analysis, the report contains a single, unbelievable line. High concentrations of tungsten carbide detected. Tungsten carbide. It's one of the hardest man-made materials on Earth, used for armor-piercing bullets and industrial cutting tools. It is not a substance that exists in nature. The implications are staggering, and they directly confirm the harnesser's terrifying new symbol, the DNA helix wrapped around a gear. The fragment suggests that the creature's teeth are no longer purely biological. They are now somehow incorporating or being coated with advanced industrial materials. This is not evolution in the Darwinian sense. This is something else entirely.
No.
This is biomechanical adaptation on a terrifyingly short time scale. The theory of the Moz forge and the lithoautotroph that consumes metal is no longer a fringe idea. This is the proof. The creature is not just eating metal, it is becoming metal. The Typhoon Group's name for it, Chalub steel, was more prescient than they could have ever imagined. The official hurricane story now appears for what it is, a masterful piece of misdirection, a cover story of immense scale. The storm was a convenient excuse, A natural disaster used to hide the evidence of an unnatural one. The damage to the Petronius platform was not an act of God. It was a feeding attempt. Dr. Miles Croft's warning about the dinner bell echoes in your mind. The harnessers, with their acoustic and electromagnetic experiments, were not just attracting the creature's attention. It seems they have succeeded in altering its very biology. It's pushing it to evolve, to adapt to the new, metal-rich environment we have created in its world. But the real question remained, a question that reframed the entire investigation. If the creature was now actively feeding on our deepest, strongest structures, and its teeth were now hard enough to shear through reinforced steel, what part of our modern technological world was truly safe from it? Was this an isolated incident, or the beginning of a new, terrifying chapter in the secret war? The tungsten-laced tooth fragment from the Petronius platform is a paradigm-shattering piece of evidence. It suggests the creature is not just a biological relic, but an evolving biomechanical threat. The narrative has spiraled into a place of primal, almost Lovecraftian horror. But you are an investigator, a skeptic. Your job is to challenge the narrative, not just build it. You must pause, take a step back, and deliberately attack the chain of evidence you have so carefully constructed. Is there another explanation? A more rational, less monstrous interpretation of the facts? This is the moment for a counter-theory, a dose of cold, hard, human-centric reality. What if the monster is not in the sea, but in the machine? Your new line of inquiry leads you into the arcane and deeply classified world of electronic warfare, and military deception. The verifiable fact that grounds this theory is the existence of sophisticated acoustic decoy systems used by modern navies. From the simple Nixie noisemakers towed behind ships to full torpedoes to the far more advanced, self-propelled devices capable of perfectly mimicking the sound signature of an entire aircraft carrier, the science of creating acoustic illusions is a cornerstone of modern naval conflict. The goal is simple: make your enemy see what isn't there and not see what is. You are now inside a defense contractor's research and development facility, a place where the next generation of these ghost-making machines is born. The engineers here are not zoologists or historians. They're masters of signal processing, psychoacoustics, and deception. They think in terms of waveforms, algorithms, and psychological impact. They are the illusionists of the modern battlefield. Here, you put the pieces of the puzzle together in a new configuration. Let's start with the sonar ghosts, the carstro staccato that has haunted your investigation. The official explanation was always that they were anomalous biologicals or geological events. You dismissed this? But what if the third option, the one whispered in the darkest corners of naval intelligence, was the truth? What if these signals were, in fact, an incredibly advanced form of enemy electronic warfare? Imagine a self-propelled, autonomous deep-sea drone, launched from a mother submarine, capable of projecting a powerful, focused, and utterly convincing acoustic illusion. It could project the sound of a creature of impossible size, creating a phantom threat to mask the approach of a real submarine, or to lure an enemy vessel into a trap. The K-129 disaster suddenly looks very different. What if the rending impact was not a creature but a new type of torpedo? Or mine and the acoustic ghost that preceded it was the lure that drew the Soviet submarine off its patrol path and into the kill zone? The psychology of this theory is compelling. It replaces an unthinkable, Lovecraftian horror with a familiar, terrestrial one: human cunning and cruelty. We are no longer children, cowering from a monster under the bed. We are back in the comfortable, if brutal, world of Spverse's spy. The Typhon Group's obsessive secrecy also takes on a new meaning. What if they are not hiding a creature at all? What if they are the ones who developed this acoustic illusion technology? Perhaps as a black project decades ago, and their entire, elaborate historical conspiracy is a massive psychological operation psyop, designed to provide a mythological cover story for their top-secret weapon system. This is where you find your new bizarre detail, the quirky piece of the puzzle that makes this counter-theory click into place. You uncover a declassified but heavily redacted DARPA proposal from the 1980s. The project's name is Project Chimera. Its stated goal is to develop a next-generation, multimodal, biometric decoy system. The proposal speaks of creating not just an acoustic illusion, but a full sensory one. It describes a drone capable of projecting a convincing sonar image, generating a realistic magnetic signature, and even releasing chemical trails synthetic pheromones to fool an enemy's non-acoustic sensors. It is, in essence, a proposal to build a perfect artificial sea monster. And here is the cipher within the document. The lead project manager listed on the proposal is a man named Dr. Alaman. It is the same name as the director of the Zurich laboratory, where the carbon dating sample of the Challenger tooth vanished in the 1960s. The man who was a member of the Collegium Antiquum, Helveticum, the cipher-obsessed historical society. It's too much to be a coincidence. What if Alaman was a Typhon Group knight all along? What if the vanishing of the tooth sample wasn't about suppressing a truth, but about acquiring a key piece of biological data, the protein sequence, the isotopic signature needed to program their perfect illusion? He didn't destroy the data. He stole it for Project Chimera. This theory reframes everything. The Maw's forge grinding sound? It could be the sound of the drone's experimental propulsion system, or even the sound of it deploying a deep-sea mine. The phantom bite on the Petronius platform. Perhaps a test of a new weapons system designed to disable offshore infrastructure. The damage made to look like a creature's attack to maintain plausible deniability. Entire Megalodon myth, resurrected and amplified in the modern era, becomes the perfect cover story. The public is primed to believe in a sea monster, so when a submarine mysteriously sinks or an oil rig is damaged, no one suspects a secret human weapon. It's the most brilliant deception imaginable, hiding a top-secret military project in plain sight, disguised as a popular monster legend. But the Typhon Group are not monster wardens. They are master illusionists, the puppet masters behind a global ghost story. Dr. Milescroft's confession could even be a part of the PSYOPA piece of deliberate disinformation designed to add another layer of mythological credibility to their cover story. This acoustic illusion theory is clean, logical, and terrifying in its own right. It accounts for almost all the evidence. It explains the secrecy, the classified files, the sonar ghosts. It brings the story out of the realm of monsters and firmly into the world of men and their endless brutal games of power and deception. It feels more real. It feels more likely. But the real question remained. And it is a question that this new theory cannot comfortably answer. The Challenger tooth was dredged up in 1873. The whaler Alistair Finch saw his white ghost shark in 1924. These events predate the age of advanced electronics and autonomous drones by decades. Were they just uncanny coincidences that the Typhon Group cleverly co-opted for their PSYOP much later?
Yes.
Or does the monster in the sea predate the monster in the machine? And perhaps the two have now become terrifyingly intertwined. The acoustic illusion theory is a cold, rational anchor in a sea of escalating horror. It explains almost everything. Almost. The problem, as you identified, is one of chronology. The Challenger tooth and Alistair Finch's encounter predate any plausible form of advanced electronic warfare. This inconvenient fact frays the edges of the neat, human-centric explanation. You must now find a way to reconcile the historical evidence with the modern technological one. Did one cause the other? Your investigation now turns to a key figure. Scientist whose work sits at the precise intersection of these two worlds, and whose sudden, strange disappearance may hold the answer. The verifiable historical context is the story of the coelacanth. In 1938, a curator at a minor South African museum, Marjorie Curtin-Latimer, discovered a strange large blue fish in a local fisherman's catch. She recognized it as something extraordinary and had it identified. It was a coelacanth, a species of fish thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific world. It was the ultimate living fossil, proof that the deep ocean could indeed harbor survivors from a long-lost world. This discovery gave birth to a new generation of zoologists, romantics, and adventurers dedicated to finding other such Lazarus taxa. You're focusing on one of these scientists, a brilliant but controversial American ichthyologist named Dr. Eris Thorne. In the late 1990s, Thorne was a rising star. Specialty was not just finding living fossils, but understanding the unique biological mechanisms that allowed them to survive in the extreme environments of the deep sea, things like slow metabolism, specialized sensory organs, and unique reproductive strategies. He was, in essence, a survival expert, but his subjects were creatures of the abyss. He was also a vocal critic of what he called the paleontological dogma that assumed extinction based on an incomplete fossil record. He was a natural target for recruitment by the Typhon Group, Dr. Thorne's last known research project, funded by a generous grant from a Geneva-based ecological foundation you now recognize as a Typhon Front, was a deep-sea tagging program in the Tonga Trench, one of the deepest and most isolated trenches in the world. He was using a new generation of satellite tags, designed to withstand immense pressures to track the movements of large, deep-water sharks and other predators. The official goal was to understand their migration patterns. The real goal, you suspect, was a Typhon Group harnesser operation, a search for chalubs. Then, in the spring of 2001, Dr. Thorne vanished. His research vessel, the Odyssey, sent a garbled, partial distress call and then went silent. A massive search and rescue operation found nothing. No wreckage, no life rafts, no oil slick. And the ship and its crew of 12, including Thorne, were declared lost at sea. The official explanation was that the vessel was likely hit by a rogue wave or capsized in a sudden, unforecasted squall. You have acquired the internal report on the incident, compiled by the same maritime insurance syndicate that investigated the Petronius platform. The report contains a transcript of the Odyssey's final, fragmented transmission. It is not a standard Mayday call. The voice, identified as Thorne's, is not panicked. It is filled with a kind of ecstatic, terrifying awe. The words are broken by static, but you can make them out. It's not a relic, it's a network. My God, the tags, they're singing to each other. The transmission ends with a sound that is not static. It is a deafening, high-frequency screech, followed by an abrupt silence. This is the central mystery. But the bizarre, quirky detail is what you find in Thorne's personal effects, recovered from his home after he was declared dead. Tucked away in his desk is a research proposal he was working on, one he had apparently hidden from his Typhon Group funders. The proposal's title is Acoustic Resonance as a Symbiotic Vector. The theory it outlines is audacious and terrifying. Thorne hypothesized that certain deep-sea creatures had evolved a form of biological Wi-Fi. He suggested they use passive metallic nodules on the seabed as acoustic relays, emitting low-frequency calls that would cause the nodules to resonate and broadcast the signal over vast distances. He believed they had created a trench-spanning communication network using the ocean floor itself as their infrastructure. This explains his last words. The tags are singing to each other. He wasn't just tagging animals. He had stumbled upon their internet. You now see the terrifying synthesis. The acoustic illusion theory and the biological monster theory are not mutually exclusive. They are two sides of the same coin. What if the original sonar ghosts that SOSUS detected were real? The natural communication of a creature like Megalodon, amplified and broadcast through a network of resonating manganese nodules. The Typhon Group, through their analysis of the SOS data, didn't just discover a creature, they discovered its communication system. Project Chimera was not about inventing an illusion from scratch. It was about hijacking a real one. They learned the creature's language. Dr. Thorne's final discovery, you realize, was that he had made a terrible mistake. The satellite tags he was using, powered by lithium batteries and emitting regular pings, were not just passive tracking devices. In the creature's acoustic world, they were shouting, they were noise. Worse, they were a signal that something new had connected to their ancient network. The harnesser faction, in their arrogance, had not just rung the dinner bell as Miles Croft feared. They had hacked into the monster's private network and spammed it with noise. Thorne's disappearance was not an accident. It was a response. The network's administrator had come to delete the unauthorized user. This solves the chronological problem. The creature and its natural acoustic ghosts are ancient and real. The modern, more aggressive, and biomechanical signals are the result of the Typhon Group's interference. They have been poking the Leviathan with an electronic stick, and it is beginning to adapt and react in ways they never predicted. The tungsten-laced teeth are not a natural evolution. They are a direct response to this new technological threat. An arms race between an ancient monster and a secret human organization. Dr. Thorne was not a victim of a simple monster attack. He was the first casualty of a war between two different kinds of intelligence. But the real question remained, a question that Thorne's own last words seemed to ask. If the creature was not a solitary animal, but a networked intelligence, a collective consciousness communicating across the vastness of the abyss. What was the true nature of its mind? And what did it think of the noisy, arrogant, new life form that had just invaded its silent, ancient world? Dr. Thorne's disappearance and his theory of a biological Wi-Fi have transformed the investigation. The subject is no longer a solitary sea monster, but a networked intelligence. The Typhon Group's meddling has escalated from a dangerous hunt into a potential conversation with an alien. Consciousness, a conversation that seems to have ended very badly for the last person who tried to listen in. You now need to find evidence that corroborates Thorne's radical theory. A network needs nodes, and a living network needs energy. Your search for this energy source takes you to the most remote, hostile, and inaccessible place on the planet, the continent of Antarctica. The verifiable historical fact is the existence of Lake Vostok. Discovered by Russian scientists, it is the largest of Antarctica's nearly 400 known subglacial lakes. It is a vast body of liquid fresh water, buried under more than 2 miles of solid ice, and has been isolated from the outside world for at least 15 million years. It is, by any measure, the most pristine and alien environment on Earth, a potential cradle for life forms that have evolved in complete isolation. For decades, scientists have been drilling down towards it, a slow, painstaking process fraught with the risk of contamination. You are now at a remote Antarctic research station. Perhaps the American McMurdo Station, or the Russian Vostok Station itself, during the austral summer. The world outside is a white desert, a landscape of brutal simplicity and overwhelming scale. Inside, you are in a cramped, overheated data processing center, surrounded by scientists whose faces are pale from months of sunless winter. You are analyzing data from a recent airborne radar survey. The goal of this survey was to use ice-penetrating radar to map the bedrock beneath the ice sheet, searching for new subglacial lakes and understanding the continent's hidden geology. The survey plane flies its grid pattern, its radar pulses slicing down through the ancient ice. The data streams back to the station, building a 3D model of the world beneath the ice. The process is routine, then something appears on the screen that makes no sense. The radar is mapping the area over the southern edge of Lake Vostok, detects the ice, the water, and the bedrock, all as expected. But within the lake itself, the radar picks up an anomaly. It's an object of immense size, several hundred meters long, and it is not stationary. It is moving, slowly but deliberately, through the subglacial water. The first assumption, naturally, is that it is a flaw in the data, a ghost in the machine. But the anomaly appears on multiple passes, from multiple angles. It is real. The next assumption is geological. Perhaps it is a massive floating island of ice that is broken off from the underside of the glacier. But the anomaly has a strange thermal signature. It is significantly warmer than the surrounding water, which is kept from freezing by the immense pressure of the ice above and the faint geothermal heat from below. This object is actively generating heat. You are witnessing the familiar pattern of psychological denial and recategorization. The scientists in the room are struggling to fit this impossible object into their known world. Is it an undiscovered supersized form of geothermal vent? An unprecedented magnetic anomaly? The official report, will eventually classify it as an unresolved hydrothermal phenomenon. The data will be quarantined, set aside for further study that will never be funded. The sheer impossibility of the finding makes it easier to bury than to confront. But you, looking at the data with the knowledge you have gathered, see the truth. And you also see the bizarre, quirky detail that no one else understands. The heat signature is not uniform. It pulses rhythmically, in a slow, complex pattern of flashes and fades. It is not the steady glow of a geological heat source. It is the patterned, dynamic signal of a biological process or a machine. You cross-reference the pulse pattern with the secret archives you have uncovered. You search the ghost log from the SOSUS technicians, the notes of the phonetic order of the abyss, the recordings from the Tartarus archive. You find a match. The thermal pulse pattern from the Antarctic anomaly is a perfect 101 correlation with the acoustic pattern of one of the most persistent and powerful howler signals ever recorded by the SOSUS network, a signal nicknamed the heartbeat. The realization is staggering. This is it. This is the central node, the main server, the power source for the entire global network that Dr. Thorne discovered. The creature in Lake Vostok is not just another megalodon. It is something older, something more central. It is the hub. The Challenger specimens encountered in the open ocean are the drones, the remote terminals, the hunter-killer harvesters. But this, this is the queen, this is the mind. Buried under 2 miles of ice, in a prison of its own making, a vast ancient consciousness is dreaming. And its thoughts are the sonar ghosts that haunt the world's oceans. This new perspective reframes the Typhon Group's entire struggle. The Wardens were not just trying to hide a creature. They were trying to keep the world from discovering this prison and accidentally setting its occupant free. The Harnessers, in their arrogance, were not just trying to leash a monster. They were trying to hack into the mind of a god. The entire history of the conspiracy, the collecting of teeth, the manipulation of data, the electronic warfare has been a desperate, multi-generational attempt to manage the single most terrifying secret in human history. That we are not the only intelligence on this planet, and the other one has been here waiting in the dark and the cold for a very, very long time. The heat signature pulsing beneath the Antarctic ice is a message. It is the steady, patient thrum of a power source that has operated for millions of years. It suddenly provides a terrifying new context for the Maw's forge and the tungsten-list teeth. The creatures in the ocean are not just feeding. They are harvesting materials, building, and adapting. But for what purpose? Are they repairing their ancient network? Or are they building something new, directed by the intelligence trapped beneath the ice? But the real question remained, a question that made the Antarctic cold seem warm by comparison. The ice sheet that has contained this entity for millions of years is now melting, a verifiable fact of our modern world. What happens when the walls of the prison finally fail? Does the entity beneath the ice perceive our climate change as an accidental side effect of our civilization, or as a deliberate and welcome attempt to set it free? The pulsing heat from Lake Vostok recontextualizes the entire mystery. You are no longer dealing with a monster, but with a planetary-scale intelligence whose central consciousness has been imprisoned beneath the Antarctic ice for eons. Its drones, the biomechanical sharks, are not just predators. They are its hands, its tools in the outside world. This revelation, however, circles you back to the very first clue. It's the one that started it all, the Challenger tooth and its impossible dating. If this creature is ancient, why do the teeth it sheds appear to be so young? You must revisit the paradox that started this journey, but this time, armed with the horrifying knowledge you have since acquired. Your investigation returns to the world of geochemistry, but you are now looking beyond the simple, linear science of manganese accumulation. You are exploring the fringe, the extreme possibilities of deep ocean chemistry. The verifiable scientific fact is that the deep ocean is not a uniform static environment. It is a complex mosaic of chemical gradients, temperature extremes, and immense pressures. Hydrothermal vents, for example, create localized zones with chemistry so bizarre they support life forms that operate on entirely different principles from those on the surface. These are the extreme environments that have always fascinated scientists. You are now in a high-pressure laboratory, a place where scientists try to replicate the crushing conditions of the Hadal Zone. They use diamond anvils and hydraulic presses to simulate pressures thousands of times greater than at sea level. In one such experiment, a team is studying how minerals crystallize under these extreme conditions. They are hoping to understand the formation of deep earth diamonds as part of their experiment. They introduce various catalysts into their pressurized saltwater solution to see how they affect crystal growth. Most catalysts have little effect. But then they introduce a finely powdered sample of tungsten carbide, the very material found in the tooth fragment from the Petronius oil rig. The result is immediate and spectacular. The tungsten carbide acts as a hyper-efficient catalyst. In its presence, minerals don't just precipitate out of the solution. They're actively, aggressively pulled from it, forming crystalline structures at a rate thousands of times faster than normal. The manganese in the solution, which would normally form a thin film over months, now plates onto the tungsten particles in a thick, glossy black coat in a matter of minutes. You are witnessing the solution to the manganese paradox. The impossibly young age of the Challenger tooth was not an error. The accelerated manganese growth was not due to a submarine landslide or some unknown natural phenomenon. It was a direct consequence of the creature's own evolving biology. The original tooth, shed thousands of years ago, was purely biological. It lay on the seabed, slowly accumulating manganese at the normal geological rate. But then, the creature began adapting, incorporating metals into its physiology. Its newer biomechanical teeth, laced with tungsten and other exotic metals scavenged from our technology, created a powerful catalytic field around them. When these new teeth were shed, they didn't just lie on the sea floor. They actively drew minerals from the water, coating themselves in a thick layer of manganese in a matter of years or even months. This is the brilliant, terrifying answer. The teeth are not all young. The dating method itself is being deceived by the creature's advanced biology. The paradox was never in the tooth. It was in our assumption that the laws of chemistry were constant. The creature is not just breaking the rules of biology, it is rewriting the rules of geology to cover its own tracks. The psychological implication is profound. We have been trying to measure an alien entity using a ruler of our own making, and the entity has learned how to warp the ruler. This brings you to the bizarre and quirky detail that ties it all together. You revisit the anonymous note that was slipped into Dr. Arvidsson's paper back in the 1950s, the one that read, "The growth rate is not a constant, it is a reaction." And you re-examine the symbol on that note. A circle with a dot in the center, the alchemical symbol for gold. Gold in alchemy is the symbol of perfection, of transformation, of a lower substance being elevated to a higher state. The anonymous author of that note, a Typhon Group warden, you now realize, was not just giving a cryptic scientific clue. They were giving a philosophical warning. They were saying that the creature was engaged in a process of alchemical transformation, of self-perfection. It was turning itself from a creature of flesh and bone into something harder, stronger, more perfect. It was turning itself into gold, or, more accurately, into steel. The symbol was a cipher for the biomechanical evolution you have since uncovered. This revised understanding of the paradox changes your perception of the Typhon Group. The wardens were not just hiding the creature's existence. They were hiding the fact of its rapid, ongoing evolution. The harnessers, in turn, were not just trying to control a monster. They were trying to co-opt its process of self-transformation, perhaps hoping to replicate it for their own military or medical purposes. The DNA Angear symbol was their proud declaration that they had understood and were beginning to master this dark alchemy. The entire history of the lost teeth now falls into place. The Challenger tooth was old and biological, but its dating was compromised by proximity to newer catalytic teeth shed in the same area. The Palawan tooth, being more recent, was likely one of these transitional, biomechanical specimens, which is why it was so valuable to the harnessers for their Judas Steer project. The creature is leaving a trail of clues, but each clue is more technologically advanced than the last. A breadcrumb trail that leads from the biological past into a terrifyingly metallic future. But the real question remained, a question that cut to the heart of this alchemical transformation. We understood now how the creature was changing itself, using our own technology as its raw material. But why? Was this simply a reactive adaptation to the new threats in its environment, an arms race against the Typhon Group? Or was it part of a much older, pre-planned process, a metamorphosis that the Vostok entity had initiated long before humanity ever built its first ship? A transformation for which our arrival was merely the final, convenient catalyst. The manganese paradox is solved. The creature's evolution is not just biological, it's alchemical. A terrifying process of self-transformation using our own technology as the catalyst. The question of why. It is doing this whether it's a reaction to us or part of a much older plan is now the central focus of your investigation. You suspect that if the Typhon Group has been studying this entity for over 150 years, they must have moved beyond mere observation. They must have a contingency plan. Your search now shifts from the scientific and historical to the political and strategic. You are looking for evidence of a government-level response, a protocol for a crisis that officially does not exist. Your search leads you to a verifiable historical event, the creation of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, in the United States in 1979. Publicly, FEMA was created to be the lead federal agency for responding to natural disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. This is its mundane, public-facing purpose. But FEMA was also created out of a patchwork of older Cold War agencies whose primary mission was continuity of government, ensuring that a functioning U.S. government could survive a full-scale nuclear attack. Deep within FEMA structure, there exists a shadow world of classified protocols and secret bunkers designed to handle existential, nation-ending threats. You are now deep inside one of these secure facilities, a presidential emergency operations center buried deep beneath a mountain. Perhaps Raven Rock in Pennsylvania or Mount Weather in Virginia? You are not looking at plans for nuclear war or asteroid impacts. You are sifting through the digital archives of a highly classified subcommittee, a joint task force with representatives from FEMA, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, and you note with a chill, several private sector consultants from geological and oceanographic firms you recognize as Typhon Group fronts. This task force's designation is Special Threat Analysis Directorate Division 9. Their mandate is to wargame and prepare for low probability, high-impact, non-traditional existential threats. In this archive, you find it. It is a thick, 3-ring binder with a simple, dark blue cover. The title on the cover is stark and chilling: The Leviathan Protocol. It is a comprehensive, multi-stage, global response plan for the sudden public emergence of a hostile, non-terrestrial, or deep oceanic alpha predator entity. The document does not use the name Megalodon or Challenger. It refers to the threat with a cold. Clinical designation: Unidentified Large-Scale Aggressor, or ULA. Reading the protocol is a journey into the mind of the UHL industrial complex confronting an unimaginable threat. You see the cold, brutal logic they apply. Stage 1 is confirmation and concealment. It outlines a series of rapid, pre-planned media blackouts, the dissemination of cover stories, gas pipeline explosions, seismic events, rogue waves, and the immediate deployment of special units to sanitize any physical evidence or neutralize eyewitnesses. It is, in essence, the Typhon Group's secrecy doctrine, but now formalized and backed by the full power of the U.S. government. Stage 2 is assessment and deterrence. This section details the use of non-lethal weapons, the very same acoustic deterrents and chemical repellents you saw in the Project Azorian contingency plans to try and steer the ULA away from populated coastlines and strategic assets, but it is Stage 3 that makes your blood run cold. It is titled Active Pacification. This is the plan for all-out war. It details the coordinated use of naval battle groups, strategic bombers, and, in its most extreme annex, the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons, specifically deep-penetrating submarine-launched warheads designed to detonate at Hadal depths. They have a plan to nuke the monster. The psychology of the Leviathan Protocol is fascinating. It is a document born of both terror and arrogance. On one hand, it is a clear admission that the threat is real, that the highest levels of government are aware of it, and that they are terrified of it. On the other hand, it displays an unshakable faith in humanity's ability to solve any problem with overwhelming force. They believe they can kill it. But this is where you find the bizarre, almost insane detail of the plan. A detail that reveals the true depth of the Harnesser faction's influence. Tucked into the final annex of the protocol is a subplan. A last-ditch option, codenamed Project Prometheus's Gift. This plan is not about killing the ULA. It is about capturing it. It outlines a scenario in which a ULA is lured into a specific pre-selected deep ocean trench one you recognize as the location of the nest from the Azorian cipher. Once the creature is inside the trench, the plan calls for the simultaneous detonation of a series of nuclear devices that have been pre-emplaced on the seafloor. The explosions are not designed to kill the creature, but to trigger a massive, targeted submarine landslide. The goal is to bury the ULA under billions of tons of rock and sediment, trapping it alive in a new man-made prison. They are not just trying to kill a god. They have a plan to put one in a box. The name Prometheus's Gift is a deeply ironic and terrifying cipher. In myth, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, for which he was eternally punished. The Harnessers see themselves as new Prometheans. They believe that by capturing and studying this creature, this living source of biomechanical alchemy, they can steal its fire and unlock the secrets of its biology for mankind. The risk of public panic? the potential for catastrophic failure. All of it is secondary to the prize, the gift of the creature's power. This confirms it. The Leviathan Protocol is not a purely defensive plan. It is a dual-purpose document, a battle plan that contains, at its heart, a heist. The Wardens helped write the plan to kill the monster, while the Harnessers secretly embedded a plan to steal it. The existence of this protocol answers the question of why the creature is transforming. The Typhon Group's Harnessers have been actively provoking it for decades, studying its responses, testing its limits, and goading it toward a trap. The creature's evolution is a direct, calculated response to this aggression. It is armoring itself for a war that it knows is coming. But the real question remained, a question that the cold, confident language of the Leviathan Protocol could not answer. The plan assumes that humanity will choose the time and place of the final confrontation. But what if they are wrong? What if the creature, guided by the ancient intelligence in Lake Vostok, has its own plan, its own timetable, and has been luring its would-be captors into a trap of its own? The Leviathan Protocol is the endgame. It reveals a world poised on the brink of a secret, pre-planned war against a creature whose existence is officially denied. The Typhon Group's internal schism has become global policy, with the Harnessers embedding their plan to capture the creature within the Warden's plan to destroy it. But as you stand back and look at the entire sprawling narrative you've constructed, the ancient tooth, the sonar ghosts, the secret societies, the biomechanical evolution, the imprisoned intelligence under the ice anew, deeply unsettling thought begins to form. It is the ultimate skeptical position, the final counter-theory. What if it's all a lie? Not just the official story, but your story, the one you've so carefully pieced together. What if the entire mystery, in all its terrifying Gothic complexity, is nothing more than a grand illusion? This brings you back to a theory you briefly considered and then set aside, the idea of a psychological operation or psyop. The verifiable historical fact is that governments have always used deception as a tool of statecraft. From the fake armies of Operation Fortitude that deceived the Nazis before D-Day, to the elaborate disinformation campaigns of the Cold War, the art of manipulating an enemy's perception of reality is as old as warfare itself. A successful psyop doesn't just tell a lie, it creates an entire self-consistent world for the target to inhabit, a world complete with heroes, villains, and a compelling, emotionally resonant narrative. We're now looking at the entire body of evidence, not as clues to a real monster, but as narrative artifacts deliberately planted to construct a myth. You are no longer an investigator. You are a deprogrammer, attempting to dismantle a masterfully constructed fiction. Let's re-examine the evidence through this new lens. The Challenger tooth. An authentic fossil, certainly, but its impossible dating could have been faked by the Typhon Group themselves, the first seed of the myth planted over a century ago. The sonar ghosts, acoustic illusion theory you explored earlier, now becomes the central truth. They are the work of Project Chimera, advanced decoys designed to create the illusion of a monster. The K-129, tragic but conventional submarine accident, its sinking later co-opted into the myth to give the monster a confirmed kill. The Typhon Group. It exists, yes, but its purpose is not to hide a monster. Its purpose is to create one. It is not a secret society of monster hunters. It is the world's most elaborate and well-funded creative agency, a long-term propaganda unit tasked with building and maintaining this global ghost story. The psychology of this is staggering. Why would anyone do this? Why construct such an immense, multi-generational lie? The answer, you realize, is the ultimate goal of any great power: control. Think of the Cold War context. Two superpowers armed with thousands of nuclear weapons are locked in a permanent, high-stakes standoff. Any direct conflict risks global annihilation. In such a world, a new kind of weapon is needed, a threat so strange, so unpredictable, and so unknowable that it can be used to influence global events without ever being traced back to its source. Imagine the possibilities. You need to stop a rival nation from testing a new submarine in a certain part of the ocean. You don't send a battle group, which is an act of war. You simply have your monster show up. The submarine is recalled, the test is canceled, and no one is the wiser. You need to justify a massive increase in your naval budget. You leak convincing evidence of a new, terrifying deep-sea threat, that requires a new generation of ships and weapons to combat. You need to distract the public and the media from a political scandal or a covert military operation. You arrange for a phantom bite on an oil rig, creating a spectacular mystery that dominates the news cycle for weeks. The Megalodon is the perfect phantom enemy, the ultimate deniable asset. It is a ghost that can be deployed anywhere in the world to achieve a strategic objective without firing a single shot. This is where you find the final bizarre and deeply cynical detail. You revisit the archives of the Typhon Group. But this time, you are looking for their internal philosophical documents, their mission statements. You find a text that is required reading for all newly inducted knights. It is not a scientific paper or a historical treatise. It is a well-worn copy of Plato's Republic, and a single section is heavily annotated and underlined, the allegory of the cave. This is the cipher that unlocks their entire worldview. Plato's allegory describes a group of prisoners chained in a cave, who believe that the shadows projected on the wall in front of them are reality. The Typhon Group sees itself as the enlightened philosopher kings, the ones who stand outside the cave controlling the puppets that cast the shadows. They see the rest of humanity as the prisoners, staring at the wall, believing in the reality of the sea monster they have so masterfully projected. The entire sprawling lore, the Wardens versus the Harnessers, the Ansu's rune, Project Prometheus's gift could all be part of the fiction. Layers of internal mythology created to give the story depth and to ensure the loyalty and conviction of the group's own members. They are not just deceiving the public, they are deceiving themselves, living inside their own elaborate fiction until it becomes their reality. They are the ultimate method actors in a play of their own devising. This is the perfect psyop, a lie so vast and so compelling that even its creators have come to believe it. This theory is devastatingly complete. It explains everything, including the inconvenient historical artifacts. By simply reframing them as the earliest stages of the myth-making process, it provides a rational, if deeply cynical, motive. It is a closed, self-justifying loop of pure weaponized information. It leaves you with nothing but shadows. But the real question remained, and it is a question that gnaws at the very heart of this perfect, airtight theory. A shadow can only exist if there is a light source and a puppet to block the light. The Typhon Group may be the puppet masters, and their technology, the light source. But is it possible that they did not invent the puppet? Is it possible that they found a small, real, and very old shadow, and have spent the last 150 years building a colossal lie around a tiny, terrifying truth? The psyop theory is a perfect, hermetically sealed explanation. It accounts for every piece of evidence by reframing it as a deliberate fabrication, a shadow on the cave wall. But your final question exposes its one potential weakness, the inconvenient reality of the pre-electronic evidence. Could a few old stories and a fossil tooth truly be the sole inspiration for such a vast, century-long conspiracy? Or is there a more tangible pattern, a physical manifestation of the threat that cannot be explained away as a modern illusion? You must now search for a pattern in the real world, a signal in the noise of history that predates the Typhon Group's advanced technology. Your search takes you to the dry, impersonal world of maritime insurance records and shipping logs. The verifiable historical fact is that ships have been disappearing at sea for as long as humans have been sailing. The vast majority of these losses can be attributed to storms, human error, mechanical failure, or acts of war. These are the known variables. But even after accounting for all of these, a small, persistent percentage of losses remains stubbornly classified as cause unknown. These are the ghost stories of the shipping industry. The vessels that simply vanish without a trace, without a distress call, in calm seas. You are now in the archives of Lloyd's of London, the historical center of the global maritime insurance market. You have gained access to their complete digital loss record stretching back to the late 19th century. You are not looking for any single, dramatic event. You're a data miner, a digital archaeologist, searching for a pattern in a mountain of data. You begin by filtering the records, removing every vessel lost to a documented storm, every ship sunk in a declared war zone, every loss attributed to a known mechanical flaw. You are left with a data set of several thousand unexplained disappearances over 150 years. On a map, they appear to be scattered almost randomly across the world's oceans. There is no obvious pattern. But then you apply a new filter, one inspired by the clues you've gathered. You narrow your search to only include vessels that were carrying specific types of cargo: high-grade steel, unprocessed metallic ores, or advanced industrial machinery. We're looking for the ships that would be most appetizing to a creature that consumes metal. The map repopulates. The random scattering of points begins to resolve itself. A faint, almost imperceptible line begins to emerge. A ghostly corridor running through the central Pacific Ocean. It is not a standard shipping lane. It is a path that arcs from the deep trenches off the coast of Japan, down through the Philippines, and towards the remote, deep-water regions of the South Pacific. It is a highway of the lost. This is the disappearance cluster. But a simple line on a map is not enough. You need to find the bizarre, quirky detail, the human element that breathes life into the cold data. You cross-reference the cluster with another database, the personal memoirs and oral histories of Pacific Islander communities. You find a recurring folktale, a story told in a dozen different dialects on 100 different anomalies. It is the story of the Wayfinder's Toll. The legend says that there is a silent, invisible current in the sea, a path of the ancestors, and that any canoe that strays onto this path must pay a toll. The toll is a piece of metal, a fishing hook, a knife blade. The stories say that if you drop a piece of metal into the water, you will be allowed to pass safely. If you do not, the canoe will be swallowed by the sea. This ancient legend and your modern data mine corridor are a perfect match. The Wayfinder's Toll is a pre-industrial cultural memory of the creature's feeding route. The islanders, with their deep, generational knowledge of the ocean, had discovered the pattern centuries before Lloyd's of London ever insured its first ship. They didn't understand what the creature was, but they understood its behavior. They knew its rules. Their ritual of offering a metal toll was a form of appeasement, a small-scale version of the old man's tax that the Australian whalers spoke of in hushed tones. The psychological impact of this discovery is immense. It fatally wounds the perfect psyop theory, the pattern of disappearances, and the cultural memory of that pattern. Predates the Typhon Group. It predates SOSUS, Project Chimera, and the entire edifice of modern technological deception. The shadow on the cave wall is not a complete fabrication. The Typhon Group did not invent the puppet, they found it. They found a real, ancient, and predictable predatory behavior, and they built their vast conspiracy around it, amplifying it, hiding it, and ultimately trying to weaponize it. The disappearance cluster is the ghost of the creature's natural behavior, faint signal of its hunting patterns before the Typhon Group began their campaign of interference. The modern era, with its massive steel ships, its oil rigs, its noisy submarines, has provided the creature with a target-rich environment. Its behavior may have become more aggressive and less predictable in response to the harnessers' provocations, but the fundamental instinct, the ancient patrol route, is still there, etched into the map by a century of lost ships and whispered in the legends of the people who knew the ocean best. The psyop is not a total lie. It is a magnification. It is a vast structure of deceit built upon a small, hard, and terrifyingly real foundation. The monster is real. Its habits are known. And the path it travels across the Pacific is littered with the ghosts of those who failed to pay the toll. But the real question remained, a question that arose from the intersection of the ancient legend and the modern data. The Wayfinder's toll was a small price, a fishing hook for a canoe. What is the toll for a supertanker, a nuclear submarine, or an entire aircraft carrier battle group that strays onto the creature's path? And have we, in our ignorance, been paying that toll for decades without even knowing it? The disappearance cluster proves the psyop theory is incomplete. There is a real physical threat with a long documented history that predates modern deception. The Typhon Group did not create the monster. They found it and built a conspiracy around it. But this raises a new, more urgent question. If the creature is real and the Typhon Group is actively provoking it, we should be seeing signs of escalation, moments where the carefully managed secrecy breaks down. You are now looking for a global event, a crisis so profound that it could not be easily hidden. A moment where the creature or the conflict surrounding it caused the entire global surveillance system to blink. Your investigation leads you to a specific and deeply strange 72-hour period in the late spring of 2004. The verifiable historical fact is that on March 14, 2004, a massive solar flare, one of the largest ever recorded, erupted from the sun. This X-class flare hurled a huge coronal mass ejection CME directly at Earth, triggering a powerful geomagnetic storm. The storm caused spectacular aurorae visible as far south as Florida and created significant disruptions to satellite communications and power grids around the world. This is the official, public explanation for the widespread technological glitches that occurred during that 3-day period. You are now in a global network operations center. It's a nerve center that monitors the health of the world's undersea fiber optic cable network. These cables are the true backbone of the modern world, carrying over 99% of all international data traffic or emails. Our financial transactions, our phone calls, they are the physical manifestation of the internet. During the March 2004 geomagnetic storm, many of these cables experienced unexplained signal degradation and repeater failures. The official cause was listed as geomagnetically induced currents, an expected side effect of the solar storm. But you have gained access to the raw diagnostic logs from the cable-laying ships and repair crews that were dispatched to fix these faults. The logs tell a story that has nothing to do with solar weather. You are looking at ROV footage from a repair operation on the Trans-Pacific 5 cable. At a location thousands of miles from land and in water over 3 miles deep, the cable, a marvel of engineering designed to withstand immense pressure and abrasion, has not just failed, it has been severed. The footage shows the two clean-cut ends of the cable lying on the sea floor, several hundred feet apart. The armored steel wrapping is sheared through as if by a colossal pair of industrial cutters. And this is not an isolated incident. You find similar reports from a dozen other deep-water cables across the Pacific, all from the same 72-hour period. In every case, the damage is not consistent with an electrical surge. It is violent, physical, and mechanical. But what is even stranger is the timing. You plot the locations of the cable breaks and the precise time each one occurred. The breaks were not simultaneous. They occurred in a sequence, a rapid wave of destruction that moved from west to east. From the trenches off Asia towards the coast of North America, a path that perfectly mirrors the disappearance cluster you identified earlier. Someone or something conducted a coordinated, systematic attack on the physical infrastructure of the global internet, and a convenient solar storm provided the perfect cover story. This is the global sensor blackout. But the bizarre and quirky detail is not the cutting of the cables. It is what happened immediately beforehand. In the moments before each cable was severed, it's the distributed acoustic sensing DAS systems embedded within the fiber optic strands, technology that allows the cable itself to act as a massive passive hydrophone recorded a sound. It was the same sound in every single instance. It was not the Carchero staccato or the Moz forge. It was a new sound, one that had never been logged before. It was a complex, multi-layered, almost musical sequence of clicks and tones. When you run this sound through a decryption algorithm keyed to the Shark collagen cipher used in the Azorian message, the result is not gibberish. It is a single, clear, repeating message. It is a command. In the cold, emotionless text of the computer screen, the translation appears, "Awaken the heart." You stare at the message, and the full, horrifying picture snaps into focus. The heartbeat was the nickname the SOSUS operators gave to the thermal and acoustic pulse from the entity imprisoned in Lake Vostok. Awaken the heart was a command sent through the creature's own stolen communication network or internet cables to the Central Intelligence under the Antarctic ice. The global sensor blackout was not a random act of destruction. It was a declaration of war. The Typhon Group's harnesser faction, with their Judas Steer protocol and their acoustic provocations, had pushed too far. The creature, the networked intelligence of Challenger, had retaliated. It had demonstrated its ability to blind and cripple our civilization at will. But it was more than a simple retaliation. The cutting of the cables was a diversion. The true purpose was the message it sent in the milliseconds before each cut. Having learned the language of our technology, it used our own system to send a command to its master. The psychology of this event is world-altering. The creature is not just a reactive predator. It is a strategic actor. It is capable of coordinated, multi-point attacks on a global scale. Understands our technology well enough to use it against us. It's the Typhon Group, in their arrogant attempt to capture a monster, have instead provoked a rival superpower, a global intelligence that has just demonstrated its ability to shut down the world. The 72-hour blackout was a shot across the bow of human civilization. It was a warning. But the real question remained, a question that made the Cold War seem like a childish game of checkers. The message was awaken the heart. What would the world look like once the heart was fully awake? What was the second command that would be sent through the silence that followed? The message awaken the heart is the climax of the secret war, a command sent by the hunter to its master through the severed arteries of our own civilization. It transforms the narrative from a story of human conspiracy into a story of imminent global confrontation. The chain of evidence is almost complete, but there is one loose thread that still dangles. A mystery that has been dormant for half a century, the Zurich anomaly. The impossible carbon dating result from the 1960s that was so surgically erased? What was the true story behind its disappearance? To find the answer, you must find the last living witness, the one man who saw the numbers and was forced into a lifetime of silence. The verifiable historical context is the city of Zurich itself, a global center of finance known for its discretion and its long, quiet memory. It is a city where secrets are a commodity, where old men in quiet cafes sometimes hold the keys to forgotten histories. You have tracked down the junior technician from Dr. Alleman's laboratory, the one who first saw the impossible printout. He is now a very old man, living out his final years in a small, meticulously tidy apartment overlooking the Limmat River. His name is Lucas Gasser. You approach him not as an investigator, but as a historian of science, interested in the early days of radiocarbon dating. For days, he is polite but distant, his memory conveniently foggy, his answers guarded. He is a man who learned a hard lesson about curiosity 60 years ago and has never forgotten it. The psychological barrier of a lifetime of fear is almost impenetrable. You cannot break it down with direct questions. You must find a different key, you mention. Almost as a throwaway comment, your research into the Collegium Antiquum Helveticum, the strange society of amateur cryptographers that his old boss, Dr. Alleman, belonged to. The name is the key. Flicker of something, fear, memory, regret crosses Gasser's face. The dam of his silence begins to crack. He leads you to a locked wooden chest in the corner of his apartment. From it, he pulls a small, tattered notebook, his personal diary from his time at the lab. He opens it to a page dated in the autumn of 1962. His hand trembles as he reads the words aloud. He tells the story you already suspected, but with a new, terrifying layer of detail. He saw the result from the mass spectrometer, a carbon-14 age so recent it was statistically modern. He brought it to Dr. Alleman, who was visibly shaken. But Alleman's reaction was not one of scientific confusion. It was one of recognition and of profound fear. Alleman locked the lab, dismissed Gasser for the day, and made a single, brief phone call. Gasser, his curiosity piqued, used an extension in an adjoining office to listen in. The call was not to a scientific colleague. The number was for a private bank in Geneva. Alleman spoke a single sentence, a phrase that Gasser wrote down verbatim in his diary, a phrase that has haunted him ever since. In crisp, formal German, Alleman said, "The Challenger artifact is not a fossil. I repeat, it is not a fossil, but is a signal." The next day, the cover-up began. The data was corrupted, the printouts shredded, Alleman's notebook misplaced. Gasser was called into Alleman's office. On the desk between them was a thick envelope filled with cash and an open-ended employment contract for a prestigious, but far less sensitive position at a chemical company. He was given a choice: a life of comfortable, silent obscurity, or an alternative that was left unspoken but perfectly understood. He took the deal. He never saw Dr. Alleman again. But this is where you find the final, bizarre, and crucial detail of the entire mystery. Gasser tells you that before he left the lab for the last time, his scientific curiosity, or one last foolish moment, overcame his fear. He went back to the sample preparation room. The original sample vial for the tooth fragment was empty as expected. But in the waste disposal bin, he found the tiny fleck of dentin that had been analyzed. It was supposed to have been vaporized in the spectrometer, but it wasn't. A tiny piece remained. On impulse, he wrapped it in a piece of lab foil and put it in his pocket. For 60 years, he has kept it hidden in his diary, a secret he couldn't bear to destroy, but was too terrified to reveal. He gives it to you. It is a tiny, almost weightless speck of dark organic material. It is the last physical remnant of the Zurich anomaly. It is the one piece of evidence that the Typhon group missed. This single speck of dust changes everything. It is not just a clue. It is a key. It is a direct biological sample of the creature, a piece of its physical reality that has been preserved outside the Typhon group's carefully curated system of control and deception. It is the one thing that is undeniably real. Dr. Alamon, the knight of the Typhon group, was not shocked by the young age of the tooth. He was shocked that it was a signal. This confirms that even in the 1960s, they knew the creature was not just a dumb animal. They knew it was communicating, that its very biology was a form of information. The young carbon-14 date was not a temporal anomaly. It was a message, a broadcast. Perhaps the creature's unique metabolism, its dark alchemy, allows it to actively purge decaying isotopes or absorb fresh carbon from the water, making it appear young. Its body is a living transmitter, constantly broadcasting its presence. The carbon dating machine was the first receiver that was sensitive enough to hear it. Lucas Gasser's story provides the final human piece of the puzzle. He is the forgotten soldier of the secret war, a man whose life was derailed by a single, inconvenient fact. His testimony confirms the timeline, the cover-up, and the secret knowledge of the Typhon group. But his secret souvenir, the tiny speck of tooth, is the ultimate prize. But the real question remained, and it is a question of staggering immediate importance. You now hold in your hand the biological key to the entire mystery, a piece of the creature's body that is free from the Typhon group's control. What do you do with it? Do you destroy it, burying the secret forever? Do you give it to the world's governments, trusting them to handle a truth they have hidden for a century? Or do you analyze it, and in doing so, risk sending your own signal, letting the ancient intelligence in the abyss know that a new player has just joined the game? The tiny speck of Denton rests in your hand. It is the alpha and the omega of the entire mystery, the last remnant of the Zurich anomaly, the one piece of physical truth that has escaped the Typhon group's century-long campaign of control. The question of what to do with it hangs in the air, a burden of almost unimaginable weight. But you are an investigator, a storyteller. Your purpose is not to act, but to understand. Before you can decide the future, you must fully comprehend the past. You must now weave together all the disparate threads of this sprawling, multi-generational conspiracy into a single, cohesive narrative. This is the moment of synthesis, where the fragments become a mosaic and the whispers become a roar. You begin where it all began. On the deck of the HMS Challenger in 1873, you see the dredging of the tooth, not as a random discovery, but as the first inadvertent contact in a secret war. You see the nascent Typhon group, with their symbol of the spiral and a triangle, quietly taking possession of the artifact, adding it to their reliquary of forbidden knowledge. The group's warden faction begins its long, silent work of managing the veil of protecting humanity from a truth it cannot handle. Then you weave in the story of Alistair Finch, the Australian whaler, whose terrified account of the white ghost shark in 1924 provides the visceral, human terror that justifies the warden's secrecy. You connect his whispered legend of the old man's tax to the older, deeper cultural memory of the Pacific Islanders and their wayfinder's toll, establishing a clear pre-industrial pattern of the creature's predatory behavior along the ghostly corridor of the disappearance cluster. The monster is real, and its habits are ancient. Into this world of myth and steel, you introduce the modern age of surveillance. You descend into the Cold War quiet of the SOSUS listening stations, hearing the howler signals and the Cartro staccato through the ears of young sailors. You see them logging these sonar ghosts in their secret ghost logs, an unauthorized act of scientific rebellion. You then watch as the institutional mindset of the military, unable to tolerate ambiguity, installs. Project Neptune's Ghost. Global filter, designed to erase the creature's voice from the official record, an act of willful blindness that perfectly serves the Typhon group's agenda. The narrative thread then leads you to the K-129 disaster in 1968. You place the sonar ghost at the scene of the crime, transforming a tragic accident into a potential act of aggression. You reveal the CIA's Contingency 9 for Project Azorian, their secret plan to deal with aggressive marine life, proving that the highest levels of intelligence were aware of the threat, even as they publicly denied it. You pivot back to the physical evidence. To the Swiss laboratory of Dr. Alemán in the 1960s, you recount Lucas Gasser's story, witnessing the carbon dating test that revealed the tooth to be a signal, not a fossil. You see the Typhon Group's ruthless efficiency as they erase the data, silencing a truth that even they found unsettling. This is the moment the internal schism begins, the birth of the Harnesser faction, who are not content to merely hide the creature, but are intrigued by its power. You follow the rise of the Harnessers, connecting them to Dr. Milescroft's heartbreaking deathbed confession. You see him as a tragic figure, a warden forced to build a prison of geological lies to protect the world, while simultaneously trying to dissuade the Harnessers from their reckless ambition. His use of the Ansu's rune reframes the creature as an intelligence, a voice. You reveal the Harnesser's Project Judas Steer, the plan to turn the lost teeth into bait, and you show it in action with the acquisition and planting of the bugged Palawan tooth. The story escalates. You take us to the phantom bite on the Petronius oil rig, the physical proof of the creature's terrifying evolution. The tungsten-laced tooth fragment confirms the Harnessers' new symbol, the DNA helix, and the Giran proves that the creature is adapting, becoming a biomechanical hybrid. This solves the manganese paradox, revealing that the creature's own advanced biology has been deceiving our scientific instruments all along. The disappearance of Dr. Eris Thorne provides the next crucial piece. His theory of a biological Wi-Fi in his last ecstatic words. It's a network reveal that you are not dealing with a single creature, but a networked consciousness. This leads you to the ultimate discovery, the pulsing heat signature in Lake Vostok, the heartbeat of the system, the imprisoned central intelligence controlling the Challenger drones from beneath the Antarctic ice. Finally, you tie all of this to the global sensor blackout of 2004. You show it not as a natural event, but as a deliberate, coordinated attack by the Challenger network on our global infrastructure. The purpose was twofold: to demonstrate its power and to deliver a single, chilling message to its imprisoned master: awaken the heart. You have woven it all together. Every fact, every cipher, every bizarre detail has found its place. From a single anomalous tooth to a secret war on the brink of global catastrophe, the story is complete. A perfect, terrifying tapestry of human arrogance and ancient power. You see the two opposing forces, hurtling towards a final confrontation, the Typhon Group's Harnesser faction, armed with the Leviathan Protocol, in their plan to capture a god, and the ancient, networked intelligence of the Abyss, now awakened and preparing to defend its world. But the real question remained, as you hold the last untainted piece of evidence in your hand. This entire story, this perfect narrative, is it the truth? Or is it merely the most compelling interpretation of the shadows on the cave wall, a story you have told yourself so convincingly that you have come to believe it? Does this speck of dust in your palm represent the key to proving it all, or is it just the final, most elegant piece of the grand deception? The entire, sprawling narrative rests before you, a cohesive and terrifying tapestry woven from a century of whispers, lies, and fragmentary truths. You have connected the dots, deciphered the ciphers, and given a voice to the silent evidence. From a single anomalous tooth pulled from the muck in 1873 to a global declaration of war sent through our own severed internet cables, the story has reached its terrifying climax. You hold the final unanswered question in your mind: is this perfect narrative the truth or the ultimate deception? And you hold the physical key to that question, the last speck of the Zurich sample, in your hand. And here, the story ends. The narrative thread runs out. There are no more files to uncover, no more witnesses to find. You are left alone with the story you have built and with the choice it represents. The journey has taken you through the looking glass, from the solid ground of verifiable history into a shadow world of secret societies, biomechanical monsters, and imprisoned intelligences. You have peered into the abyss, and you have seen, or believe you have seen, something staring back. You look down at the speck of dentin in your palm. It is the only thing you can be certain is real. Every other piece of evidence, the logs, the recordings, the confessions, could be part of the grand psyop, the shadows on Plato's cave wall. But this is a piece of the puppet itself. To analyze it would be to finally, definitively answer the question. It would collapse the wave of possibility into a single particle of truth. Is it a real biological entity of impossible age and origin? Or is it a sophisticated fabrication, its chemistry and structure engineered to fool our instruments and support the grand lie? The answer is within your reach. But to seek that answer is to take the final irrevocable step. It is to make yourself a player in the game. To analyze the sample is to send a signal of your own. It's to announce your presence to both the Typhon group and, perhaps, to the networked intelligence of the abyss. You would no longer be a storyteller. You'd become a target. Or worse, a catalyst. And so, you make a choice. You walk to the window of your quiet room, the city lights shimmering below. You open the small foil packet and look one last time at the tiny speck of dust, the heart of a mystery that has consumed nations and generations. You hold it on the tip of your finger, and then you let it go. You watch as it is caught by the breeze, a tiny mote of dust, indistinguishable from a million others, and disappears into the vastness of the night. You have chosen not to know.
Out.
You have chosen to let the mystery remain. Why? Perhaps out of fear? Perhaps out of a sudden, profound understanding of the Typhon group's warden faction. The belief that some truths are too dangerous to be known, that some veils are there for a reason, or perhaps it is something else. Perhaps you have realized that the story itself, the web of connections, the human drama of fear, and arrogance is more important, more true, in its own way, than the final sterile fact of the matter. The question of whether the monster is real or a fabrication has become secondary to the reality of the actions taken in its name. The conspiracy is real, the weapons are real, the fear is real, and that is enough. The lights of the city seem to dim. The hum of the world outside softens. You feel the immense crushing weight of the story you have assembled, the story you now carry alone. The truth is not in the facts, but in the pattern. The truth is that we are a young, noisy, and breathtakingly arrogant species, afloat on a thin crust of rock over a world we do not understand. We have filled the air with our chatter and the seas with our machines, convinced of our own dominion. But in the deep, silent, ancient places of the world, other older powers abide, and they are beginning to listen to our noise. You are left in the quiet of your room, the silence deeper now than it was before. The mystery of the lost Megalodon tooth is, for you, solved. Not because you have found the final answer, but because you have come to understand the true nature of the question. The question was never, does the monster exist? The question was, what have we become in our search for it? You dim the lights. The story is over. The silence that follows is unsettling. It is vast and deep, and it feels for the first time like it is listening.